Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about What If Naruto x Aquaman Justice League Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. It's a strange thing, facing death with a smile. The very concept of death is viewed with such negativity and contempt that you'd think it'd be impossible for the divines to do it, let alone regular mortals. Nevertheless, there are those strange exceptions who defy this trend. Souls who suffer from either being too brave, foolish, wise, or just too damn tired not to look at the end of their lives with anything less than a grin. For better or worse, Itachi Uchiha had been one of those people. Having been born in a time of turmoil for his home, he had learned very early on how the world was a dark and cruel place. And that simply living life, much less living a good one, was a gargantuan task that far too many took for granted. So he decided not long after his first battle that he would live his definition of what was a good life. The life of a protector. A guardian who looked after his family, his friends, their families, and the place they all called home in Konoha. That was all the dream had ever been. Someone else could be leader. Someone else could be the best, the smartest, or the most powerful. Those titles meant nothing to him. As long as he could watch over those who were close to him and the people and place he called home, he would be happy. And yet, in spite of that worthy, selfless goal, fate had decided he should instead be the opposite. Despite being good-hearted and wise enough to know when not to fight, Itachi had a natural ability for battle and killing that rivaled or surpassed any of the great warriors that had been born to the elemental nations. A gift that, whether wanted or not, transformed him into one of the most feared men in Konoha. He rose through the shinobi ranks at an astonishing pace, outclassing his comrades in everything he did. Weaponry, stealth, genjutsu, ninjutsu, taijutsu. Sure, there were some who could best him in a single area, but there was no one who could practice all of them to the level that he could, eventually eclipsing his classmates completely and joining the elite of the elite, the ANBU Black Ops. Yet, even after joining a notably dark and secretive organization such as the ANBU, Itachi had always tried to remain a cheerful person, always greeting people with a light smile that most would simply overlook. Perhaps seeing the worst humanity had to offer made him appreciate the good even more, or perhaps he was simply a nice guy. Whatever the case was, those years with the ANBU ended up being the happiest years of his life. He was loved by the village, respected by his comrades, celebrated by his family, revered by his little brother, and perhaps the one thing he never really appreciated, it all felt simple and right. He was the good guy. The Uchiha were the good guys, Danzo, Hiruzen, Minato, and even Orochimaru for a while. All of them were allies. Everyone who served Konoha was good, and those who stood against it were evil. Was that ever really the case? Deep down he knew the truth, but for those few years, he was perfectly fine with believing that it was. Then things began to crack in his perfect world. He realized just how deep Danzo's schemes went. He realized the citizens of Konoha were turning on the Uchiha. He saw the Uchiha being backed into a corner, and knew that they weren't going to stand it forever. It was then he had personally asked to be taken out of the ANBU and serve directly under Sandaime, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and tried to act as a mediator between the Konoha government's suspicion and the Uchiha's pride and rage. To try and save his idealistic world he had lived in for so long. For all his skills, though, negotiating was not one of them. Soon enough his hopes for peace began to fade as his mediator role began to dissolve to him simply spying on his own clan for the Sandaime. And the normally decisive and quick-thinking Itachi found himself being torn apart between his loyalties. Who was he supposed to protect if he couldn't save both? His home or his family? His stress began to get the better of him, and eventually he confided in the only soul he really trusted more so than even his little brother, Shursui Uchiha, prominent member in the Uchiha police force and his oldest friend. Matching himself in almost category of skill and ever the optimist, he had hoped Shursui would be able to help quell the situation before it exploded into conflict. Shursui listened to everything Itachi told him with the relaxed eyes that occasionally flared up in surprise or anger, and once he finished, decided on a solution. Together they decided that the best way to stop anything from happening, at least immediately, was to cast a genjutsu Shursui possessed over the entire village and make them sort of forget their growing animosity for the Uchiha. A genjutsu so powerful yet so subtle on that scale would almost certainly kill him. But like Itachi, Shursui took that as a small price to pay for a lasting peace and would do it gladly. Just like that, there was a plan. A plan to turn things back to normal like it never happened. Naturally, it was too good to be true. Danzo had coveted Shursui's technique for some time, and after learning of what he intended to do with it, acted on his urges. He crippled the Uchiha warrior and stole one half of his Sharingan, destroying any chance of the plan being put into the action. Itachi's rage got the better of him, and he briefly wondered if his family was right to rebel. But Shursui put those thoughts to rest, reminding him that even with his weakened, it was better than everyone else dying in a war. The wounds that Shursui suffered would ultimately prove fatal, however, and to keep Itachi from possibly going to war on Danzo and Konoha itself, Shisui made him swear to find another way. That Konoha was built on the idea of finding one. And with those last words, he gave his friend his remaining eye and asked him to end his suffering, granting him a power legendary among the Uchiha but ultimately leaving him to confront the inevitable alone. The weeks that followed Shisui's death proved to be the worst Itachi had ever experienced. Riots were occurring against or for the Uchiha all the time, and each time one occurred, things got more and more tense between them and Konoha. Itachi himself began to become an outcast in his own home. His father grew ever more distant, his mother acting like he wasn't even there. His former friends and comrades turning on him, growing suspicious of what had truly happened to Shisui, saying that Itachi had killed him to grab power. All his loved ones had begun to turn their backs to him. All except one. From the day he was born, Sasuke had always been one of the few shining lights in Itachi's life. He was his little brother. Someone he would always need to watch over and defend. He was kind, caring, energetic, youthful, and above all else genuinely soft-hearted. As if he was too innocent and good to have been born into this world. He could do nothing wrong as far as Itachi was concerned. He was the one person who never turned on him or treated him differently, partly because he didn't quite understand why the others did and partly because he idolized Itachi. More than his father or any of the Kages, he was Sasuke's hero. Itachi never really knew how to react to such adulation but was nevertheless proud to be the center of it, and strove to prove it whenever he could. And in those dark days, nothing meant more to him than simply spending time with his brother trying to forget about the incoming conflict. Finally, the choice became unavoidable. The village stood at the edge of an abyss, and the slightest thing would send it spiraling into all-out war. He had to decide who he would ultimately side with. The Uchiha or Konoha. And the decision he made would ultimately shape the course of not only Konoha but perhaps the entire world. He knew the Uchiha would never accept anything except unconditional surrender if they went to war, so the options dwindled down to a first strike mission. Before they would attempt to mobilize, they would be eliminated. Knowing the weight of what had to happen would have killed any other, he decided to do the task himself. He had only one condition for the Sandaime to meet if he was going to do this. Sasuke was to be spared. He would be looked out for by the entire village, and hopefully be far away when this happened. Hiruzen accepted the agreement, and reluctantly gave Itachi the permission to perform the task, informing him that no one could know that Konoha was responsible for what would occur. In essence, he would become a fugitive wanted dead or alive by Konoha. Itachi took all of this with a simple nod and bow, and when the night of the task came, garbed in his Umbu uniform under the light of a full moon, he began what would ultimately be his last mission for Konoha. By the night's end, every Uchiha save one had been slaughtered, and the one who survived had been scared for life and set down a path of vengeance that would ultimately destroy any sense of childlike wonder or innocence he had. And as for Itachi, well, he knew that there would be no redemption for what he had done. He had committed the ultimate sin, and to the rest of the world established himself as a powerful monster. With his dreams shattered, his loved ones dead and his home saved, all he could hope for now was a good death at the hands of his brother once he had found the strength to do so. The 8 years that followed came and went for Itachi with only a few things really leaving a mark on him. He joined an organization called the Akatsuki as a double agent, he drove out Orochimaru from the group, he met his little brother a few years too early and had to once again tear his soul apart as he brought Sasuke to his knees in front of his friend, and to top it all off, fate had decided to punish him for his crime by giving him a disease that only seemed to weaken him as the years went on, with strong coughing fits and frequent bouts of illness. Still though, despite all of that, it was once again simple for Itachi. He was the bad guy working with other bad guys now, and that was fine. He would play the role of villain until justice would one day get to him, and that would be the end of it. A simple fantasy that he always tried to believe in. That day finally came when an older battle-hardened Sasuke faced him at the ancient Uchiha temple. This was it. There was no going back from this. Sasuke wouldn't stop until he had killed him, and he deserved to be faced with all the power Itachi could still muster. The battle they had shook the ground around them, leveling the temple and scaring the very land itself. Itachi wanted to see everything his brother had learned. Every jutsu he had under his disposal and every trick he had under his sleeve. The sight of his brother's skill made Itachi prouder than almost anything else, and decided to end things by giving Sasuke a glimpse at a technique he hadn't yet acquired. The Susanoo. And when Sasuke fully saw what such a technique could do, that was that. Itachi's strength had finally exhausted itself into oblivion, and he collapsed right next to his brother, dying with a smile on his face. That was supposed to be the end of it. That was supposed to finally send him to hell with the worst demons and monsters ever to grace the planet, and seal him there for eternity. But that wouldn't be enough, however. He returned to life as reanimated corpse bound to serve under a power-mad villain named Kabuto along with his other reanimated warriors. His first battle, however, freed him of this predicament, and now as an unbound undead warrior, He charged off towards Kabuto to put an end to his scheming and free the other souls he had forced back into servitude. So he was to get one last chance to be the good guy, huh? That worked just fine for him. Maybe he could actually live his dream one last time before truly dying. Fate proved kind to him that day, as not only did he face Kabuto as the hero but did with the help of his brother. A sight he was sure he would never see again. Sasuke himself had figured out the truth about Itachi, and had very mixed feeling about his brother. Wondering why he chose Konoha over the Uchiha but decided to help his brother defeat Kabuto before getting answers. And that battle, despite being so much smaller in scale than his fight with Sasuke, might have actually been his proudest moment. Sasuke had grown into just as good of warrior as any of the legendary figures had been, and his movement and technique were fashioned into all his own, not taking cues from any of them. Finally, the battle finished with Kabuto subdued and him releasing the jutsu that held Itachi's soul and the souls of all those who were resurrected back to the afterlife. He was sad to see his brother clearly angry and confused and sad about his return to the grave, but decided to end it on a note that would ultimately change Sasuke's path. You see, ever since the death of his family, Sasuke's path had only growled darker and darker, to the point that his skills threatened to destroy everything Itachi had hoped to still protect. He blamed Konoha for their deaths and was hell-bent on burning it and everyone who lived there to the ground. His chance meeting his undead brother, however, began to crack that plan of action, and by the time the battle with Kabuto had ended was now more confused about it than ever. He asked what Itachi wanted him to do. Itachi wanted to say protect Konoha. He wanted to say do as I and Shursui did and live for the greater good. Be a protector. But he loved his brother too much to tell him that, and in truth he had often wondered if he himself had done the right thing. So he decided to give the one thing Sasuke needed more than anything else: reassurance. That's for you to decide, Sasuke. But no matter what happens, he grabbed the backs of his brother's head and pushed his own head forward until both made contact. Staring into his brother's tear-filled eyes, he told him what would never be untrue. I will always love you. He smiled, gratified he had gotten to say those last words as his body began to disappear in bright ray of light. Sasuke was too awestruck to say anything back as Itachi closed his eyes and took in one last breath as his body returned to the dust and his soul returned back to hell. So that was that. That was how the story of Itachi Uchiha came to an end, or at least it should have been. It seemed fate wasn't finished with him yet. A brilliant flash of light dumped his body in a dark snow-ridden Gotham City alleyway, crashing down into an overflowing dumpster and scaring some poor hobo who looked to see what the hell just made that noise. His musings led him to said dumpster, and widened his eyes when he saw the body of a naked young man lying in the dumpster. Now any self-respecting Gotham hobo would have just left him there, saying it was none of his business, and do their best to forget what he saw. This particular hobo, however, felt that he couldn't very well leave a naked breathing man lying there in the cold snowy trash, and so with a few grumbled curses he rolled the young man out of the trash, unknowingly starting a chain reaction that would forever change the world around him. Gotham always looked odd when the snow fell. It never powered through it like Metropolis does, and it never really added anything to it like in, say, Star City. The snow just sort of mixed in with the architecture, streets, and cars to form something almost entirely new city. Now, did that change the inhabitants at all? Well, unfortunately the people who call this city home are too stubborn for their own good. Does that do it for the night, sir? Alfred's voice asked into Batman's ear. Batman ducked under a clumsy punch from an assailant and offered a strong boot to the back of the man's head that sent him to the ground unconscious. You should know the answer by now, Alfred, Batman replied. But sir, with Master and his friends coming home for Christmas in a few days. He's coming home to see you, Alfred, Batman pointed out, not bothering to believe any other reason. Sir. I'll keep in touch, Batman said, cutting off the voice before looking around at the 5 odd assailants lying in the snow-covered street next to some rather expensive-looking weaponry that, while deadly in trained hands, proved useless to a few small-time punks. Guns are moving through the West End again. Probably coming in from the port, Batman thought to himself as he grabbed each downed individual and placed them around a nearby glistening light post, tying them to it so they wouldn't get any ideas. He grabbed the now obsolete guns and walked towards his rumbling transportation. After depositing the weapons safely in the trunk, he leaped over the hood of the Batmobile and into the driver's seat. The engine roared with power before blasting back onto the wintry road, sending thick clouds of snow into the air that all came back down in a dazzling show. Bruce? A new voice said from his communicator. What is it, Clark? Trouble with Toyman? Batman asked. Well, not anymore, his friend said, smiling a few hundred miles away as said Toyman was carted into the back of a heavily fortified van. Honestly, I think he's not trying as hard. Well, don't let him hear that, Batman replied, whizzing by a slower car. Alfred called. He said you're worried about. I'm not worried about him. Batman grumbled, annoyed at his butler's ability to contact pretty much any one of his friends. He won't want to see me, so I'm doing him a favor. Well, why wouldn't he want that? Superman asked. Because of a mistake, Batman replied simply. Not going to elaborate? Trust me, you wouldn't either, Batman said, his voice heavy with regret that sounded strange coming from him. Okay, but I think you should at least try and talk it out. You never know when you might not be able to again, Superman said, concerned for his friend as he took off into the metropolis sky. I'll keep that in mind. You mean you'll ignore it? Superman pointed out with a light twinge of humor just as Batman cut off the transmission. That Boy Scout advice of his always got under his skin. But at the same time, it was almost always right. Batman knew he would have to talk to about what had happened between them one day. And with no possible world-ending events happening in the last 6 months since the Darkseid incident. Well, to be perfectly blunt, they were due for another one at any time. So that day would have to come sooner rather than later. But not now. Now he would simply respond to a loud police alert that screamed out how 2 armed gunmen were robbing a nearby jewelry store. Hey Frank. Where the hell have you been? A tall-sized lumbering man asked to the new figure who walked into the light cast by a small dumpster fire. The man named Frank waved to both his greeter and to the 2 others who sat by the crackling flames. Dropping from his shoulders a suspiciously human-sized blob wrapped in discarded newspapers and second-hand rags that maybe once upon a time could have been considered clothes at his side. Frank? Please tell me that isn't what I think it is? One of the sitting men asked, his voice high with worry as he pointed towards the wrapped-up object. Relax, Paul. Frank replied, trying to ease the worry before it spread. He's still alive. I found him in a dumpster. Is he okay? Asked a feminine voice. I'm not sure. I heard him crash into it, so he could have been wanting to end it. Frank replied, casting a strange look over to the man. Then you should have left him, the larger man said. Hey, it's the Christmas season, maybe all he needs is someone to talk to, Frank reasoned. Remember how bad off you were when we met, Wallace? Wallace huffed behind his covered face and looked away, causing Frank to laugh and look over to the only female in the group. Would you mind taking a look at him, Janice? Sure, honey. The smaller figure named Janice replied, pulling back her hood to reveal a face of early 60s, light gray hair, and kind blue eyes, moving towards the unconscious person and bending over to look at him. He was at least partly Asian but didn't look it completely, and even if he had been, it wouldn't have done anything to his looks as far as she was concerned. Well, he's certainly a fine-looking young man, she said with no small sense of awe. He's got better hair than I do. That's not exactly hard to do, Paul said, speaking, causing a middle finger to be pointed his way. A few more moments passed before she spoke again. He's perfectly healthy. Not visible scars, bruises, nothing. He's honestly in better shape than any of us, she said with a sigh. So what then? Stockbroker who lost all his money? Wallace asked, throwing out any possible suggestions at who the stranger was. We should wait and ask him, Janice said, looking back towards the figure. His body's exhausted, but he sounded like he was waking up. She was proven right when the stranger began to groan and force himself off the ground. At the risk of watching him fall back over, Frank and Janice moved to hold him up. They did so just in time as the man fell back into their arms, trying desperately to get control of his body. Whoa. Easy, son, you fell 10 stories, Frank said. The man looked up to the voice that spoke with onyx-covered eyes that seemed to radiate confusion. He moved to speak but found his throat was far too dry to do that, making a small dry noise rather than actual words. Janice seemed to catch up on this and looked over to Wallace. The large man nodded grumpily at the look and pulled out a glass bottle filled with a dark-colored liquid. Here, honey. It's not water, but it should perk you up, Janice said, grabbing the glass and pouring some of the liquid down the man's throat. He nearly coughed it back up at first, but quickly got used to the flavor and downed close to half the bottle in one go before finally breathing. Frank took the bottle away from his hands and helped him sit back on the ground. The man looked at all of them now as he began to fully realize his surroundings and just how cold it was. He immediately pulled the makeshift newspaper blanket closer to his skin, causing Paul to laugh. Yeah, that sounds about right, he said, smiling at the Asian. So, you cold long time? Paul, Janice scolded, punching him in the shoulder. He once again laughed at rubbing his shoulder, clearly confusing the stranger even more. Wheream his voice caught in his throat. Those words weren't his. Were they? Didn't he sound different? Didn't he speak something else? Welcome to Gotham, crown jewel of the U.S., Frank said with a noticeable sarcastic voice. Itachi's eyes widened yet again as he could perfectly understand the man and his strange-sounding words. The man himself was dressed modestly with ragged clothes and a strange-looking hat coupled with a thick brown beard and hazel eyes. Name's Frank. Frank? Itachi repeated back to the man who nodded. What a strange name. That's right. That big fella over there is Wallace, Frank said, pointing to the tallest figure with a bald head, green eyes who dressed in similar rags. Paul, he said, pointing over to the thinner man who waved in greeting. And Janice. He finished, looking over to the elderly woman. She gave a slight head bow in greeting. Okay, he took it back, they were all strange names. So, you got a name, stranger? Frank asked. Itachi, he said in greeting. Itachi Uchiha. Uchiha? Sounds Japanese, Wallace said, pondering the name pronunciation. Japanese? Itachi asked, not recognizing the name yet understanding it as his mind began to race with even more questions. The most problematic of which was that small little issue of not being dead. By all accounts, he was alive if tired and cold. What? Never heard of the Japs? Wallace asked, only to be hushed by Janice. Let's give a minute to think, she said. Itachi would have thanked her if not for the literal dozens of questions that now ran through his mind. Why was he alive? What was this Gotham City? Why was he speaking and understanding a language he never heard before? Why was it snowing? None of it made sense. What's the last thing you remember, honey? Janice asked, clapping his shoulder, trying to comfort the clearly confused young man. He looked at the hand and then to the person who it belonged to. His concerned face relaxed somewhat at meeting her kind eyes. Dying, he said simply. The four looked at him like he had grown a second head. Yes. I'm sure it sounds strange. Well, not as strange as you might think. What with all the weirdos who fly around these days? Paul replied. You do know half of them can probably hear you, right? Frank replied. Oh yeah, well they can piss off for destroying my house, he screamed out to the cloud-filled dark sky and falling snowflakes. Feel better? Janice asked. A little bit, he replied with a little laugh. You've lost your home? Itachi asked. That definitely made sense considering the rags the man was wearing. We all have, Frank replied. Paul lost his in some superhero fight. Janice's ex took hers in the divorce. Wallace lost his job when the recession hit, and I got fired a while back, he said as each looked away at the sad reminder of their predicament. Well, why stop there, Frank? Want to tell him about my athlete's foot as well? Wallace asked, annoyed at the ball cap wearing man. Frank shrugged in reply, causing Itachi to unknowingly grow a small smile. What about the buildings around here? Itachi said, staring up to the towering objects that currently surrounded them. All occupied. Otherwise we'd be there, and out of this goddamned cold, Janice complained with a shiver as she pulled her own paper blanket closer to her. I hear that. So what do you guys say to a little celebration? Wallace said, pulling out a small wad of green paper. Itachi noticed everyone's faces light up at the sight and figured the roll of papers must have been this place's currency. Where did you get that much cash? Frank asked. I managed to land score a job at the docks. Got my first check earlier today. Well then what the hell are we doing here? Let's get some steaks. Paul yelled out, excited as he turned to look at Janice. Irene's? Sounds good to me, Janice said with a nod, straightening up. Frank nodded in agreement and helped Itachi to his feet. He had no idea where they were going, but if the destination was food, he saw no reason to complain. The walk to Irene's was beyond taxing for the Uchiha. Not because of his lack of strength. No, that had been returning to him steadily with each step he took. But the sights that filled threatened to knock him on his ass. Fast-moving vehicles called cars sped by all around them at speeds that could rival his own movements. The buildings that had surrounded them in that alleyway had proved to be actually minuscule in size compared to many of the others. Some of the buildings reached so high into the sky he wondered if they were taller than any of structures back in AIM. The largest of which probably stood close to 100 feet higher than the second tallest if Itachi had to guess. In particular about said building was the giant letter W illuminated on its side. Ah. First time seeing Wayne Tower? Frank asked, looking up to the structure with a small degree of awe. I never get tired of seeing it. This Wayne. He is a person? Itachi asked, trying to get a feel for the city. Richest man in Gotham and probably the world, Frank said with a sigh. Kind of a though, if I'm being honest. Itachi's eyes widened at the very idea of how much money this Wayne must have had and chuckled lightly at the description at the end. Hey, you can reminisce about your job later. Let's eat. Wallace suddenly yelled out to the pair as he opened a door to a small diner that sat comfortably in the shadow of several far bigger structures with the word plastered at the top in neon. Irene's. Batgirl's thoughts should have been on her job. It was a cold night in Gotham, and those hardly ever turned out well. But as she glided through the air and onto another rooftop, her thoughts constantly drifted back to coming home for the holidays. They hadn't seen each other in forever, and the idea should have filled her with excitement. Instead, though, all she felt was anxious. It wasn't like she didn't understand why, nor could she blame him for doing it. But she had hoped that the three of them had put what happened behind them, but now with him coming back, she wondered if it would actually stay buried. "Hey, Batgirl?" A voice echoed into her ear. "Yeah? What's up, Huntress?" "Not much. Just kind of bored," Huntress replied. "How's Tim doing?" Batgirl asked, looking over the side down to the sparsely populated streets below. "He's fitting right in," Huntress said with a smile as the sound of skulls bashing together echoed all around her, as well as a childlike laugh that followed. Soon enough, a young crime fighter flipped over to her side and raised an eyebrow through his mask. "I thought you were going to join in." "Some other time, Red. Right now, I'm honestly hungry," Huntress said, ruffling the boy's head. The boy in question was dressed head to toe in a crimson-colored outfit with an R stitched into the right side of his chest. "What do you say, Batgirl? Want to grab us some food?" "Sure." Batgirl grumbled, annoyed that she had been volunteered but nevertheless feeling hungry herself. "I got to make a patrol past the south side anyway. I'll pick you guys up something along the way." "How's that going to work exactly?" Tim's voice said, making itself known on the intercom. "Just walk up to a diner and ask for food dressed in your costume. As long as they get their money, I don't think they'll really care," Batgirl pointed out before running to the opposite end of the roof and flipping into the air before activating her grapple. "So you don't think he'll be mad?" Tim asked Huntress. "Red, trust me. You're going to get off scotch-free compared to the other bats," Huntress admitted. "I can still hear you too," Batgirl's voice yelled before cutting off. Tim looked guilty, but Huntress simply shrugged it off. "Your fault for cheating on him," Huntress mumbled. "Now this is food," Paul garbled out as he chewed on a medium-well steak. "We're doing this every week now. With you appetite. I wonder if Wallace will ever do this for us again," Janice replied, drinking some sweet tea. "Let's just take this for what it's worth, okay?" Frank said, looking over to his big friend. "Thanks for this." "Don't mention it. Food's always better with friends," Wallace replied before looking over to see the empty plate of the newest member of their little entourage. Itachi had never been a voracious eater, but for some reason or another, he had been hungry since he awoke, and the food in the city was just so damn good. Especially considering he never particularly cared for steak before. In fact, he ate with such ferocity that several other people in the crowded diner had stopped to look over to him. That's amazing," Itachi said, fighting back the urge to ask for seconds. Especially considering that with every bite he took, he could feel his previously minuscule chakra supply grow. "Knew you'd like it. Irene's had the best steaks in this town ever since I was a kid." Paul smiled with a decent burp. "Janice too, though I guess that was back in the Stone Age." "Keep it up, Paul. See if I help you out anymore," she said, biting into her last steak piece. Itachi smiled at the group's antics. They were definitely a mismatched sort, and yet he couldn't imagine them working with anyone else. Strangely enough, it reminded him of the last real group he had been a part of. "Itachi?" Janice asked, bringing him back to reality. He looked around at the concerned faces of the others before bowing his head. "You okay? You looked lost in your own little world there," Frank said, finishing his drink. "Yes, speaking of which, where are you actually from?" Paul asked. Itachi's eyes widened as a thought came to him. "Do you have a map?" he asked. The four of them looked at each to answer him, but before they could, 3 loud bangs rocked the diner as 3 goons appeared into view. "All right, boys and girls. Just set your wallets to the side and we'll be in and out of your hair in no time," their leader sneered. Despite the now fearful atmosphere that quickly flooded the diner, one person found himself just as composed as he had been before. The only real difference being that what was once a small smile had shifted into a neutral and slightly unsettling frown. "Joke's on him. We have no money," Paul whispered as the 2 smaller goons began to go around the room while the one in charge moved to the register. "Shut up, Paul," Janice whispered back to him as she tried to position himself in front of Wallace. The action didn't go unnoticed by one of the thugs, however, who sneered and pointed a gun in her direction. Itachi didn't know what that object was, but by Janice's body stiffening, it must have been dangerous. "Come on, cough up the dough," We're homeless. We don't have any, she shrieked as the gun crashed into the side of her head, knocking her out of her seat and into the floor. Bullshit. You wouldn't be eating here if you didn't have any. Hey! Leave her alone, GHA! Whatever courage Paul had disappeared as the same thug planted his foot into his stomach, knocking him down as well. You three got anything to say? He then asked to the three still sitting people, waving the weapon around in each of their faces clumsily before stopping directly in front of Itachi's. The man pulled back and sneered at his calm look. Well, now we got ourselves a brave one, he asked, flipping the table out of the way and standing directly in front of the formerly dead ninja. It's okay to be scared, you know. Makes the job more entertaining. Frank and Wallace gave a subtle nod to each other that meant not to try anything, but unfortunately Itachi didn't understand the gesture. Strange. Considering I don't find it the least bit amusing, Itachi said, surprising Wallace and Frank in just how cold his voice then became, and making eye contact with the robber's emerald-colored eyes. Oh yeah? The man growled out, concerned by the look of pure ice that Itachi's eyes had become. He pointed the gun directly at Itachi's head, an inch away from his nose. Well, about I just blow your goddamned head off. Itachi's old Umbu instincts kicked in as he scanned the room, taking in the locations of the other two assailants frighteningly quick before putting all of his attention back on the one. With my luck, all it would do is annoy me. The man was going to reply before a sudden tidal wave of fear washed over him as the previously onyx eyes that were staring into his own shifted into a far more intimidating crimson color. So 3 double cheeseburgers? 1 plain and the other 2 regular. 3 large fry. And 3 waters. Anything else? A voice asked through at a drive-through intercom. Nope. That'll be it, Batgirl said back. All right, ma'am, that'll be $22.50 at your first window. Barbara nodded and started walking towards said window, not really paying attention to the flabbergasted people in the car behind her. After a while of fighting monster criminals as a crime-fighting member of the Batman family, the looks of civilians just seemed to become of the environment. So much so that she didn't even register the man's beyond surprised expression behind the window as she handed a roll of cash. No, she only responded when the stare he never gave back the change. I'm kind of in a hurry, she said politely. The man behind the counter immediately returned to normal and handed her change. Thanks, she said, moving the final window. Okay, ma'am, here's your meal, the woman at the second window said, nearly dropping the bag into Batgirl's arms before seeing who it in fact was. Nice. Thank you, she said, happy to finally smell some food, and immediately cradled the bag in one hand and activated her grapple, catapulting her into the sky and soon out of sight from anyone at the drive-thru. Okay, Huntress. I've got, she started into her comm, swinging through the air only for the sounds of multiple gunshots interrupted her thinking. Yeah? Barb? Huntress' voice asked back. I've got a situation. A little diner called Irene's a few blocks off from the subway, Batgirl said, planting herself on a rooftop just opposite of said diner. I'll be a few minutes. Need help? Tim asked. Nah. None of the big gangs, probably just some punks. I won't be long. She ended the conversation with that, and placed the bagged food on the rooftop before descending down to the street. She ducked behind a parked car to avoid being sighted from the windows. Looking through the glass, she could make out 3 decently built thugs, each wearing ski masks that hid everything but their eyes and mouth, and waving around firearms aimlessly at the crowd. 1 shotgun and the other 2 handguns. Yeah, this was going to be easy. Before she could leap into action, however, one such thug moved to a table and started wailing on some people there. Okay, he was going to get the worst of it. She was more right than she knew. That same thug then pointed the barrel of his gun straight at a young man's face. Not a second later, he collapsed. Before she could even wonder what had happened, the sitting man leapt up from his seat, grabbed the gun before it could hit the ground, and fired off 2 shots towards 2 of the other robbers. One hit its mark, sending one of them to the ground with a loud yell, while the other shattered some glass, giving just enough time for the third man to duck behind the counter. Wallace, Frank, get them out of here, the young man ordered in a cold, almost robotic tone that only further threw Batgirl for a loop. He couldn't have been much older than she was. He leapt into the air with grace, giving her full proof that those quick reflexes hadn't been a trick, and situated himself behind a knocked-over table. Just then, she scolded herself for taking so long to get moving and leapt dash towards the nearest window. Itachi cursed his lack of chakra quietly. Using a genjutsu at in his weakened state was foolhardy, but he couldn't take any chances. There were too many variables at play, especially with their weapons. He quickly tried to eliminate the other 2 thugs with one, but their design was strange. With his Sharingan activated, he did his best to study them quickly. It appeared to be an extremely modified design of a crossbow with completely different type of ammunition and effects. It fired an object much smaller than an arrow at an extremely high velocity, and it required an aim that Itachi didn't have at the moment to maximize efficiency. "You bastard!" How the last thug's words were cut off as the glass of nearby windows shattered. Itachi glanced towards the sound, and what he saw made his eyes widen. A young red-haired woman garbed in a dark suit with sparks of yellow on her chest and hands had charged through the wall with an energetic smile. She pulled out a weapon that looked different than the one he had and saw her a metallic rope shoot out and wrap around the weapon of the assailant. Batgirl ripped the shotgun out of the man's hands and not 2 seconds later drop-kicked him into the wall, almost smashing through it and falling to the ground unconscious. She gave a smirk at his direction before looking around to see if anyone else had been hurt. Most had done exactly what the stranger had ordered, and soon enough there was police lights on the scene along with the comforting blare of an ambulance. She breathed a sigh of relief and then turned to the only other conscious occupant in the diner. Itachi stood back up to greet the newcomer. He was a little bit taller than her, but that wasn't saying much. She held herself like a warrior ready to fight, yet seemed relaxed at the same time, and her eyes seemed to shine with curiosity and energy. All in all, she was an interesting figure at the least. Her thoughts were similar, though they were more focused on the strange pattern and color of his eyes. Cape. Strange costume and colors. Mask. A vigilante warrior of some kind? Deciding it would be best to give a good impression, he offered a greeting smile. My thanks. Don't mention it. You okay? She asked, studying the ragged man before her. It wasn't just the garbage clothes that gave her such an impression either. Despite his quick reflexes, he just seemed so tired. Like he'd just woken up. I'm adequate, he replied, trying his best to be reassuring. Well, don't try to be the hero too often, she scolded. It can end making things worse. I wasn't my intention, I assure you. I merely wished to protect my acquaintances, he finished, instead of friends. He had only, after all, just met them. I know. And for what it's worth, you're calm under pressure, she said, looking back to the one who had just seemed to drop over. Judging by his breathing, he was still alive, but his eyes appeared glazed over. Like he was under some kind of spell. What happened to him? He's currently experiencing the pain of being trapped inside a house fire, Itachi said simply. It should be over in a few moments. Batgirl's widened eyes told Itachi that she didn't seem too fond of his technique, but both of them turned their heads at the sound of a supposedly unconscious man groaning. Itachi quickly tore his gaze back to him and raised the gun, pointing straight at the downed would-be robber. Just as he fired, the gun was kicked out of his hands and into the ground. What the hell was that? Batgirl yelled. He's still alive, Itachi replied, confused by the action. You did mean to kill him. No, she yelled. I don't kill people. Batgirl, get out of the way. A policeman ordered, entering the restaurant in time to see the action and raising his own firearm. Just wait a second, this guy, Batgirl began to explain, only to hear fast-moving footsteps moving away from her. She groaned as the man she was about to defend ran out the door and away from the police. Look, I'll handle him. You just make sure these guys stay down, Batgirl ordered before taking off after Itachi. Hey! Stop! She called out to the man who had already gained a considerable distance from her. Geez, he's fast, she admitted, only to be confused yet again as he leaped into the air at a height that wasn't supposed to be possible for a regular guy. And even weirder still, he wasn't aiming for a rooftop. He impacted on the side of a building and started running along the outside of it horizontally. Okay. New meta. That's nice. She sighed before firing up her grapple yet again and swinging after him. Right past her bag of now cold burgers. She followed him for close 7 minutes, constantly calling out for him to stop, but to no response. Finally the pair slowed, and it was here she noticed that Itachi had actually been following something in the streets below. The pair had stopped on a rooftop overlooking Gotham General Hospital, and as she walked ran up beside him, she saw a pair of medics rush out of a now parked ambulance with a person strapped to a gurney along with what looked like 3 homeless people swiftly following them. She then looked over to the man standing beside her, and was stunned at all the emotions were visible in his now onyx-colored eyes. Regret seeming to be the most prominent. An acquaintance of yours? Yes. A woman named Janice, Itachi replied. Paul seems to be okay, but she looked hurt. You can see really well, can't you? Was that what the red eyes did? She asked. Amongst other things, he said swiftly. Annoyed by the lack of elaboration, she decided to try another route. Look, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Batgirl, she said, extending a hand towards him. He finally turned his gaze away from the hospital and onto her. He somehow looked just as intimidating now as he had with the red eyes. Itachi Uchiha, he said, hoping that no one in this land would recognize the name as she shook her hand. Itachi Batgirl said with a nod. Look, back at the diner. Were you really going to kill that man? Yes, he replied simply. I assumed you had meant to, so when he started moving I meant no offense. Look, I'm not offended by it, but you can't just murder people. Didn't your parents teach you that? They taught me how. The line successfully disturbed her. She almost felt the need to vomit at the thought. Fighting back that feeling, she spoke again. We'll get back to that. The guy at the diner who fell over. You said he was experiencing a house fire. How? Itachi chose his words carefully. It was an illusionary technique. As I said, it isn't permanent. He'll be awake soon if he isn't already. Illusionary technique? This guy just raised more questions than he did answers. Batgirl sighed. Where are you from, Itachi? He looked like he was about to reply when a familiar voice began to shout into her ear. Batgirl, Batman needs us at the port. Apparently Two-Face and Penguin are going at it, Tim's voice said. And bring the burgers, Hunter's voice added on. Batgirl sighed. Look, I'll be there in a second, she said before focusing back on Itachi. Or she would have if not for the fact that he had vanished. She dashed all over the roof and in all directions to try and see where he had went. Nothing. It was like he was never there at all. Well, that figures, she said with a sigh before deciding to worry about it later and immediately took off towards the distress call, disappearing into the snowy city. Just then across the street from her Itachi came into view from behind the giant pine tree that was strapped to the top of Gotham General. Did he understand why it was there? No, but he reminded himself that he was the stranger here, so he had no right to complain. He then leapt down onto the street below, landing as silently as was humanly possible and walking into the hospital. As the night dragged on and the snow continued to fall at an almost constant rate, a man closed the blinds of his shop window with a heavy sigh. He never had liked the snow and had even more contempt for the time of year that currently held dominion over it. Still, though, wasn't a lot he could do about it. He locked the door behind him and shut off all the crimson and green lights that had been strung up as well as the traditional ones and made his way upstairs to his home. Once inside, he once again locked the door and marched over to the computer. His eyes dashed all over the screen as he scrolled through any new articles of crime that had happened in the city. As usual, many of them blended together in extreme uselessness. Carjacking epidemic. Bank robbed. Muggings low from last month. Nothing of even remote interest to the man. He sighed and was about ready to close out the window when a new article appeared. A diner held up. It didn't sound that unusual, but he continued reading through it nevertheless. In a strange turn, it seemed a vagabond had helped one of the Bat family. There was a video attacked at the bottom of the article. Can you describe the rescuer besides Batgirl? The voice of Vicky Vale asked, presumably to one of the people who had been in the diner. He just seemed rather plain looking, honestly. Young, 20s, some long hair, just a poor homeless guy, until you saw the eyes. The man's attention grew astronomically as he waited for the victim to continue. His eyes were really wired. All blood red with dark spots on his pupils. Honestly, he looked more like a bad guy than a good guy. The man paused the video and leaned back against his wooden chair. It was probably a coincidence. This world had been so populated with abnormalities that the odds for it actually being what he was hoping for were slim to none. And yet, what if it was? What if someone else had finally appeared in this new world? The thought was too comforting to simply discount. The man ran his thin fingers through his bright red hair and narrowed his gaze. If there was the slightest chance that it was actually him, he needed to start searching. He stood back up and grabbed a tan trench coat hanging against the wall. He then opened a window that led out to a fire escape, closing it behind him just as a strong wind smacked against his body. He paid it no mind, however, and quickly leapt down onto the snow-covered cement below. He sighed at the ground he would have to cover, but didn't hesitate. If this was truly a familiar face, maybe he would finally manage to get some answers on how he got here. Superman smiled as the sight of his fully packed suitcase. He was finally ready to get out of the city for the year and head back to Smallville. Ready to enjoy a nice calm Christmas with his parents, and John if he decided to pop up for the holidays. He looked back out to his apartment balcony as the snow continued to rain down, illuminated only by a nearby steep light and a small string of Christmas lights. Just in time for his calm to go off. "What's up?" he asked. "You heading out yet?" Wonder Woman asked him from the pilot's seat of her Javelin as she flew through the blizzard. "First thing tomorrow," Clark replied, closing the blinds to his apartment balcony. What about you? Going back to Themyscira? Not this year. I'm actually spending the holidays with Bruce. Diana. Well, that's some progress, Clark said, smiling. How'd you accomplish that? Alfred. Diana's responded. He seems really worried about Bruce not wanting to be home when the Titans show up in a few days. Yeah, I got that vibe too. Superman nodded in agreement. So nothing's happening? Nothing out of the ordinary, Diana replied. There was an earthquake in the Pacific Islands, but Flash and some other League members have that covered. Though Aquaman did say there had been trouble in Atlantis earlier today. Think we should investigate? Clark asked. You know how he is. Diana answered back, annoyed at the King of Atlantis' ever-condescending tone. Likes to keep his city to himself. Yeah. Kind of like another person we know. Clark finished. I'll talk to you later, Diana. Night, Superman, Diana said before phasing out. With that out of the way, Superman collapsed onto his bed, drifted into his sleep. Or rather tried to anyway. Despite this being what was supposed to be his favorite and most calming time of the year, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As if something was coming, or worse, already here. He hated those types of feelings. Not because they stopped him from sleeping, but because they were almost always right. I'm going to murder you bastards. Do you hear me? Aquaman couldn't believe the man who sat chained up in his prison cell. Even after attacking Atlantis in a strange blood craze, bringing down 24 Atlantean soldiers who had tried to stop them, and even having the courage to face him in single hand-to-hand combat, he still had the energy to scream at the top of his lungs for hours on end. He had never this before. And considering the company he kept, that was saying something. And then I'll take your spines and shove them right up. The audio from the cell shut off just in time as Aquaman sighed. The man also swore about as much as an 80-year-old sailor, so that didn't really help when it came to try and find meaning in his rants. My lord, we've scanned his body. An Atlantean scientist hesitated, appearing behind him. Speak up, Aquaman ordered. We're unsure of what to make of him, sir, the woman admitted. He's exceedingly odd. How so? Aquaman asked, interested in getting some answers. Well, as you know, he has incredible strength and speed for a regular surface dweller, and his stamina appears to be at least 3 times the amount of normal surface dweller, she said. But what's most curious is his self-healing ability. He's healed completely from the broken bones you gave him when he attacked in just a few hours. I've noticed. We have any idea how? Aquaman asked. Inconclusive, my lord, she said. Aquaman ran a hand through his beard as he began to think. Perhaps the League will know more about him then. What shall we do with him in the meantime? She asked, looking out towards the screen of the still ranting lunatic. He'll face Atlantean justice for attacking us. Until then he can stay in the cells, Aquaman ordered as he left the room. The man himself was chained up in the bottom of the royal palace, naked save for a single pair of cloth pants they had provided to him after he had been subdued. He had gray slicked back hair and sported a pair of crazed purple eyes that darted all around the room in an act that looked insane to the untrained eye. And where is my fucking scythe? Is she going to be okay? Itachi asked. Docs think so. Frank sighed with relief. She's a stubborn old broad. The pair looked onwards to their bedridden friend laying peacefully in the hospital bed, linked up to a few machines that Itachi recognized as similar to the ones they used back at the Elemental Nations. That was good reflexes back there. You had training? Frank asked. Itachi gave no worded response, instead settling for a nod that told Frank all he really needed to know. Well, you reacted better than me or Wallace, so that's saying something at least. Frank sighed. Wallace himself had decided to wait in the other room while Paul was being looked at. How is Paul? Just a little banged up. They should be done with him in a few. Frank sighed. His started to twist with anger and annoyance. We need to get out of this godforsaken city. Itachi raised an eyebrow at the statement. It is an understandable reaction to. You don't get it. It's not just tonight. Almost every other day something bad happens to us. Sometimes me and Wallace can stop it before it gets bad, but other times he stopped to take in a breath and calm his nerves. Sorry. I just get frustrated easily. Is that how you lost your job? Itachi asked, trying to change the subject for ballcap-wearing man. Yeah. Turns out I don't have the temperament for Wayne's security. Frank replied with a strangely nostalgic smile. Itachi gave a small smile in return before picking up a particular set of footsteps outside the room. It was a busy hospital, so no particular set should have stuck out, but these sounded stiffer, not by much, but just enough to induce some hesitation as the door opened and a young blonde nurse walked in the room. "Mr. Itachi, could you come with me, please?" she asked in a polite tone. Frank looked to the nurse, then back to Itachi. "I got her. Go take care of whatever it is," Frank said. Itachi nodded and stood up, following the woman out of the room and closing the door behind him. The pair navigated through the crowded halls rather easily, but not towards any particular area a nurse might talk to someone. They passed the front desk, several doctors, and other rooms until finally they came to an empty room in surgery. "Just inside," she said politely, but with a blink that seemed almost too robotic to be human. Itachi prepped himself for another attack should one come and walked through the door. His eyes immediately landed on the only other figure there, dressed in a long trench coat that hid most of his body except for a striking mound of bright, unkempt red hair. Itachi tempered his hopes. The odds of it were microscopic, so. "Do you know how long it would have taken for you to find me?" the voice said in the eerily calm tone that Itachi had only known to come from one man. "Sasori," Itachi started. "Answer me, Uchiha," the voice ordered. "I'm not sure," Itachi replied quickly and honestly. "Itachi Uchiha, unsure of himself, seems I was right about you," Sasori scoffed, finally turning to meet him face to face. Seeing the notoriously blank, dead-eyed face of the puppeteer, Itachi wasn't really sure of what reaction to have. Sasori and him were former comrades, true, but the pair had barely any interaction outside their group gatherings. More so, he had never been sure where Sasori's true allegiance lied. Whether it was to the Akatsuki's goal of peace, or some ulterior motive altogether separate from the group. And that mystery had always made Itachi wary of the redhead. "Right about what, Sasori?" Itachi asked, not dropping his guard in the slightest. "I think you know, Uchiha," Sasori replied swiftly as he took in the sight of homeless Itachi. "But this is neither the time nor place to discuss it." "Agreed," Itachi added on. "Do you know what's happened to us?" "It's simplest enough to see. We're back from the dead," Sasori dryly pointed out. "Understanding how and why, however, that remains much more puzzling. As does our current location." He pulled out a device that Itachi could only guess was for communication, from one of his trench coat pockets and started sliding his finger up and down it as it glowed a dim light. Sasori's passive stance didn't change, but his voice spoke again, newly frustrated. "Gah. What is it?" "Yet another annoyance," he replied, biting his lower lip. "Come. We'll discuss this further at my home." "Home?" Itachi grew even more curious at that word. "Did I stutter?" Sasori asked back, opening a door behind him. "I never could stand hospitals." Itachi thought back to the others waiting in the room a ways back, but knew he needed answers before he did anything else. He wished them a silent farewell and followed his old associate out of the room, but not before Sasori grabbed what looked like a bag off of the table. "Burger?" he asked. Itachi's confused gaze was almost enough to make the puppeteer smile. As the last thug dropped to the ground with a newly broken jaw, Batko breathed a sigh of relief. This had been way too close to call. "You okay, Batko?" Robin asked over to the yellow and black cloaked vigilante. Barbara gave him a thumbs-up gesture as rubbed her shoulder, which still burned from a crowbar impact. Surrounding her was said crowbar and about a dozen now either unconscious or crippled goons. And those guys had just been the ones she had fought. In total, there had been close to 40 of them, all surrounding a large warehouse that stood just at the edge of the docks. The strange thing, though, was that there wasn't any visible thing that could have caused. "Not like you to call and back up," Huntress said, standing behind the cloak of caped crusader who kicked open the locked door of the seaside warehouse. "What's going on?" Batman didn't reply as he peered into the surrounding darkness. Huntress sighed and pulled out a flashlight. Flicking it on, she saw that the warehouse wasn't exactly empty. It was filled to the brim with large metal shipping containers stacked right put to ceiling. "Geez. Some weapons cache," Huntress sighed in slight awe. "If it is that," Batman told her as he moved to the closest container. The lock was quickly disposed of, and the pair pulled apart the container doors, expecting to see some sort of familiar weaponry. Assault rifles, RPGs, something of that sort. What they didn't expect was for the container to filled with the strange white clay cubes that spilled out onto the warehouse floor. Huntress chuckled at the sight. "Well, someone got ripped off," she said with a laugh. "Unless the guys outside expected warehouse filled with Play-Doh." "Don't be so quick to judge," Batman scolded before activating his comm. "Gordon, I've got a warehouse on the east end loaded with an unknown substance. Have any nearby police quarantined the area? You sure? What is it? The voice of the police commissioner asked. I'll let you know when I find out, Batman replied before closing the conversation. He picked up one of the clay cubes and placed it in a bag. Don't think you're going overboard? Huntress asked. Haven't you learned by now to never ask that question? Batgirl reasoned, walking into the room with Robin at her side. Fair point. Huntress sighed before perking up. So, where are the burgers? Oh, about that, Batgirl smiled sheepishly. For God's sake, I asked you to do one thing. Huntress seethed. No, you volunteered me to do one thing, Batgirl replied. Besides, things got hectic. Met a new meta today. A new one? Robin asked. What can he do? Run on walls for one thing, and he can vanish about as well as Batman over there. Batgirl pointed out, which perked the interest of the caped crusader. He can also change his eyes and might be able to use psychic attacks, but I'm not sure about that last one. You get a name out of our new mystery man? Huntress asked. He said his name was Itachi. The journey through the city went quietly save for the impact of their footsteps in the snow, and without a hitch save for one instance of a group of hoodlums looking like they were gonna take their chances on the pair, only for a side glance from Sasseries to change their mind. That same glance then shifted back to Itachi and caught glimpse of a slight smile that faded just as quickly as it appeared. Sasori made note of the display but decided to discuss at a later date if at all, and went back to his groaning. The cold had never really bothered Itachi. True enough, he had been trained to survive in almost any possible conditions the elemental nations could throw at him, but dealing with the cold and the snow was something that he actually enjoyed. This was the complete opposite to his associate, who spent the entire walk grumbling some curses under his breath and silently wishing for the snow to shape-shift into the warm sand he had always preferred. I don't suppose you've looked at the stars since you've got here, Sasori finally muttered aloud, stopping in the parking lot of an average 3-story unassuming building nestled nicely in the outskirts of the Gotham downtown area, and just outside the suburbs, covered in the same red and green lights Itachi had seen all around Gotham. Itachi glanced up to the sky and saw the sky was still blocked with gray clouds before replying. Haven't had the chance. As far as I know, I just awoke a few hours ago, Itachi replied. A few hours, interesting. Sasori walked past a blacked-out neon sign that looked like it would light up if given the chance with the words Beatrice Bowling. That raised several questions for Itachi. Specifically, who was Beatrice and what was bowling? The door to the building opened with screech as it pushed away some of heavy snow. Hurry up. I've had enough of this cold for one night, Sasori complained as Itachi refocused. He walked past Sasori, who held the door for him. He was greeted with darkness until the flick of a light switch was heard. The darkness evaporated as several hanging lights illuminated the rather large room, revealing several tables that stood on the top of the purple carpet, edging next to just as many lanes of wooden floor that led to the opposite end of the room. Itachi walked around, getting a feel for the room itself. Several other lights littered the room that each gave off shifting shades of color and seemed to somehow have some strange liquid moving inside it, tearing itself apart and then reforming in a strange gelatinous mass he had never seen before. Mind the lava lamps. Damn things are hotter than they look, Sassery's voice announced as he reappeared with his coat now over his arm, along with a second pile of clothes, wearing a simple long-sleeve black shirt and cargo pants. Lava lamps? You know, I was hoping you would be the one who could give me answers. Sasori sighed. Figures, I guess. Here. Itachi took the clothes quickly and breathed a sigh of relief as he got out of the rags that had kept him warm since he had gotten here. With his back to turn to the changing Uchiha, Sasori continued. Any memory of what happened? Outside of dying again, nothing, Itachi said, slipping on a simple dark blue shirt and sweatpants as well as a pair of socks. I released Kabuto's jutsu and that was that. That doesn't surprise me. You had the greatest odds of breaking out of the trance, with your little ruby eyes. Where are they anyway? Sasori asked, seeing his associate's eyes in their regular form. Reserved for later, Itachi replied. Sasori smirked for a half a second. Chakra coming back slower, huh? Sasori asked. Sasori, do you know what's going on here or not? Itachi finally asked. Something that's far more confusing than comforting, Sasori said with a sigh. I myself have been pondering that question for the last 2 years. 2 years? Sasori nodded as he relaxed into a chair. Strange, isn't it? Tell me, is the last thing you remember of the elemental nations was dying as the reanimation ran its course? Itachi nodded. The same was true for me, Sasori admitted. Last thing I expected afterwards was waking up here. Not undead and fully in control of myself. And you never figured out how? Itachi asked. Don't assume I haven't tried. Sasori shot back, narrowing his gaze at the Uchiha. But being dropped in a world you have no prior knowledge of tends to slow such things down. I couldn't assemble an army of spies or informants that I didn't have. Didn't? Itachi asked. Sasori allowed himself a small smirk. Once my situation became fully apparent to me and my chakra began to return, I set out to gather as much information as I could gather about this world and its inhabitants. So I needed informants on every level of society. The nurse Itachi realized while giving Sasori a look of disdain. She's perfectly fine if you wish to know. Sasori replied, annoyed by the look. She simply provides data on any potentially interesting residents of Gotham General, as do many other nurses and doctors in various other hospitals across Gotham. You haven't changed at all. Itachi sighed. You should know death rarely changes someone, Sasori said, glancing at the ceiling. After all, you were still a traitor to the Akatsuki even after you came back. Itachi narrowed his eyes in a hateful glare towards the redhead, who returned it in equal measure. That implies I was on the Akatsuki's side to begin with, Itachi admitted. Call it whatever you like. It doesn't change the fact that you still sided with the home that ordered you to murder your own family over us. Sasori spat, clenching his one visible fist. Tell me, if it had come to it, would you have killed all of us if Konoha said they would take you back? Kisame included? Itachi did his best to remain collected in front of his fellow Akatsuki member, but Sasori saw Itachi's previously passive body tense up at the mention of the dead swordsman. If it would have been for the greater good, Itachi replied. Greater good? Sasori laughed harshly. You'd get along with these superheroes. Superheroes? That was a strange word to hear. Almost as strange as the woman's clothing had been. I think I met one of them earlier tonight, Itachi said, trying to change the subject. A female who wore what looked like bat insignia. Yes, Batgirl. Sasori nodded, taking the change. I read about that. What did you make of her? She seemed confident, energetic, righteous, Itachi started. And naive. Sasori finished for his compatriot. She and the rest of her clan hold to a no-killing rule. Her clan? Count yourself lucky you met her rather than Batman. Sasori chuckled as he stepped up out of his chair and began to stretch. But I think that will do for the night. Unless you plan on killing me. Sasori started up the stairs. Itachi stood up, having had enough of the tone of voice. Itachi asked, if you hate me so much, Sasori, why give me a place to stay? Why come find me at all? Itachi stopped at the middle stair and sighed yet again, perhaps more at himself than Itachi. Besides, hoping you might have known why we were sent here. It's just nice to know I'm not the only one who's been condemned here. He turned back around. Walking through hell with a snake is better than walking through hell alone. Sasori vanished from sight, and soon after the sound of a door shutting ran through the room with a thud. Itachi collapsed back into the chair as a huge wave of guilt ran over him. It wasn't like Sasori didn't have the right to be angry if he had been truly loyal to the Akatsuki, and to top it off, he had offered him a home. He had no right to be annoyed with the man, but it didn't change the fact that he was, and just in case this was a trap that was yet to be sprung, Itachi would sleep with one eye open tonight. If he even slept at all. Itachi woke with a start as something bounced off his head. He heard a few more bounces beside him and saw the culprit had been a small rubber ball. Morning, Sasori said, walking past him, now wearing a simple white shirt and sweatpants. Itachi grabbed the ball off the floor and looked over towards the redhead, annoyed. Don't give me that. You're lucky I didn't just slit your throat, Sasori replied, sensing the look as he moved towards the door. Itachi rubbed his eyes and groaned as he tried to fully wake himself up, drowning out the sounds of conversation that Sasori seemed to be having. When he opened his eyes again, the red-haired puppeteer had returned to his sight with a square cardboard box with the letters pizza on it, which he then threw onto a nearby table. Breakfast. Itachi looked confused, but the hunger he had quickly drowned it out. He opened the box and, after inspecting the rather strange-looking food, took a piece. The explosion of flavor he tasted nearly threw him to the ground. Wow. It doesn't look like much, but it's got some flavor to it, Sasori agreed, pulling a large plastic bottle filled with a dark brown liquid from the fridge. You want a drink? Water, thank you, Itachi replied before taking another bite. Sasori nodded as he poured the liquid into his cup before grabbing another and heading over to the sink. When he came back, Itachi had started on his third slice. Hungry yet? It's good, Itachi replied, finishing off another bite. So what happens now? I don't have a clue. Sasori admitted, taking a seat. I had almost given up hope on finding anyone else here. But with you here now, I'm wondering if the others are here as well. The rest of the Akatsuki? Yes. If the both of us died yet again, it stands to reason there's a possibility that the rest of us who were reanimated suffered the same fate. Even so, there's no good reason to say that they are here as well, Itachi pointed out. Some of us weren't exactly subtle in nature. I'm aware. And even if they are, who's to say no one else came with them? Sasori said, drinking the liquid that was fizzing in his cup of his. Which, if that's the case, that's going to raise no small amount of concern. Amongst whom? Itachi asked, leaning back into his chair. How much do you know about the wider world? Sasori asked. Itachi shrugged his shoulders, giving Sasori his answer. As expected. Sasori replied, shifting his eye upward. Come with me. He ordered, closing the box of pizza. Itachi followed him up the stairs and through the open door. He didn't hide yet another confused look at what lied inside it. Rows of ancient-looking objects were scattered upon shelves all around the large room, upon what looked like home-made shelves. The shelves filled all four walls of the room save for a large window that led to a metal deck on the outside. The only other objects in the room besides that were stashed behind a waist-high granite table that blocked off another door and a completely glassed-up shelf of doll-sized puppets. Mind the antiques. Sasori ordered again as he leaped over table. You run a shop? Itachi asked. It's a living. Sasori grumbled as he reached behind a rather bland-looking on the shelf right behind him. Itachi thought he heard a small clicking noise and was soon surprised when one of the shelves slid into the one beside it, and another door appeared in its place. As Sasori took the boxes through the door behind his desk, Itachi walked to the newer opening. It opened to a narrow flight of stairs that went up to what Itachi guessed was the third level of the building. Once there, he was greeted with multitude of lights, each emitting from about 12 different screens of various size. Dozens of people would pop up onto the screens as well, talk for a bit, then vanish to show presumably what each was talking about. All in all, it caused Itachi to take a step back, right into Sasori. A bit off-putting, isn't it? Sasori asked, pushing him aside and moving to a single chair that sat right in the middle of all the chaotic screens. I'll admit it took me a good time to get used to. What are these? Television sets, computers, radios, anything and everything I could get my hands on that keeps me tuned into the world around me, Sasori said. Are all these things happening at the same time? Itachi asked, astonished at the sheer volume of what he saw as his eyes dashed from one screen to another. Some are more recent than others. You'll find that this world isn't exactly short on anarchy, Sasori replied as he began furiously tapping on the keyboard on his laptop. And this is just the stuff that is allowed to be viewed by the public. What the people are not allowed to see, that's where things really get interesting, Sasori said, forming a rather creepy smile. Itachi moved over to see what he meant, but not before his eyes lingered on yet another screen as a red blur flew past the screen. Sasori looked to see what was keeping the Uchiha and chuckled at the sight of Itachi's seemingly growing confusion at one particular figure. But first you'd like a proper schooling in the world of superheroes? That would probably be the wisest choice before I do anything else, Itachi replied with a nod. Right. Sasori sighed. Before turning his chair towards him. I think the best way to explain it would be starting with the big one. He's called Superman. A new screen caught Itachi's attention, as did the figure that it showed. A well-muscled man with slicked back black hair, perfectly white smile, a hefty chin, and the strangest clothes Itachi had seen that accompanied a bright red cape. So who is he? Clark couldn't hide a smile as he locked the door to his apartment and picked up his suitcase. What could he say? He was going home for Christmas. Was it cheesy? Oh, unbelievably so, but was that never a bad thing as far as he was concerned? If anything, people could stand for a little more cheese in their life. Especially the woman who greeted him at the bottom floor of the building. Took you long enough, small vial. Hey, had to double-check everything, Clark defended as he adjusted his glasses. Can't risk forgetting your cowboy toothbrush, huh? It's a collector's item, Clark replied with a wink as he tossed his stuff into the trunk of the cab. You're hopeless, you know that? Lois asked, not hiding a smile. Yep, glad to see you decided to actually follow through. Hey, I'm a woman of my word, Lois replied. You got the Pulitzer, and now I'm roughing it in the boonies for the holidays. Tell me you actually had plans, Clark said, closing the trunk. Lois gave her response in a raised finger. Clark laughed and moved back over to her. Trust me, Smallville isn't as bad of a place as you think. I'm not worried it's going to be bad, Kent. Just that it's going to be boring. Oh right, can't have you be bored. You might actually have to do something else besides chase after monsters or aliens fighting giant robots. Mock me all you want, Lois replied with a shrug. But that's just how I am. I can't stand cheesy things like small-town Christmases or you. I know, Clark replied, opening the door for her. And that's why I'll have a good time changing your mind. Lois looked at the door, then back to Clark, who just smirked down at her. She tried her best to fight a chuckle before stepping into the cab. Clark closed the door behind her and practically skipped over to his side of the taxi. I'm gonna have this guy run you over if you keep doing that, Lois said to him as he got in. Please. You love it. So to sum up, he's easily the most powerful among them. Though he also has the biggest conscience, so that could be exploitable. Exploitable? Itachi asked with an edge to his voice. If it comes to it. Only fools fail to consider every option, Sasori clarified, tilting his head, seemingly amused by Itachi's hesitation. Itachi reluctantly nodded in agreement. Fair enough, I suppose. You seem like you're under the impression that I want to cause harm to these people, Sasori replied, rubbing his neck. On the contrary, I do my best to avoid them. Why's that? Itachi asked. Not long after I first arrived here, I had an encounter with a member of the Bat family that resides here in this city. Called himself Batman. Sasori's calm eyes briefly shifted to anger before flashing back to normal. What were you doing? Surviving, Sasori replied with a slight edge to his voice that implied not to question him about it further. Long story short, if Superman is the most powerful, Batman is the most dangerous. Itachi listened with intent as Sasori described the notoriously dark and brooding Dark Knight of Gotham. Isn't that kind of rude? Rude? Bruce asked, blowing on his newly poured coffee. Well, yeah, I mean you basically up and leave when they're in the middle of talking to you. Doesn't that seem rude to you? Bruce didn't respond, instead opting to drink as Alfred gave a small smile towards young Tim, who sat at the opposite end of the table as he sipped his own cup of tea. True. But Master Bruce has never particularly cared about the opinions of others. Bruce turned his famous glare over towards his old friend, who returned it in almost equal measure. I changed your diapers, sir. No look you give me is going to intimidate me. Bruce sighed as Alfred took off into the kitchen, and Tim got himself a good laugh. Look, all I'm saying is maybe you could benefit from not trying to be such a hard ass. At least not to the people who help you, Tim continued after calming down. Any other advice? Bruce asked, his voice dripping in sarcasm. No, just a question, Tim replied, his voice growing curious. What happened between you and Alfred? When's that meeting with the board again? Bruce quickly asked, eager to change the subject. About an hour, sir, Alfred answered just as quickly, causing Tim to huff in annoyance. Best we get moving then, Bruce said, suddenly getting up and straightening his tie. He looked over to the still-seated Tim. And did you actually do what I asked you to do? Who do you think I am? Tim asked back just as Bruce Wayne began to move towards the manor's exit. I checked the shipping container that had all that weird clay cubes. If I had to guess, I'd say it was from Japan. My thoughts exactly, Bruce agreed. So what do? We taking a vacation tonight? Tim asked, slightly hopeful at the idea of traveling. The Titans did take a mission there some time ago, Alfred pointed out. Shall I send them a message? It's a good start, Bruce replied, opening the door to the manor and walking out to a newly bought Lamborghini. That's not. Get used to a lot of things being possible here, Sasori replied. A station in space? Correct. It even caused small alarm to these people some time ago. Itachi's face contorted into a small absurd smile. He wanted to laugh but really couldn't find the energy to do so. This place made absolutely no sense. Okay. Fine. I'll buy it. I really don't care if you do or don't, Sasori replied as his typing continued. What are you actually working on? Itachi asked, getting annoyed with the constant noise of the keyboard. Finances, Sasori replied. I thought you ran an antique shop. I do. But that hardly would pay for all this equipment, Sasori finished. Itachi raised an eyebrow and moved so he could see exactly what his associate was doing. So is all that racket you're causing supposed to somehow get you money? One thing about this world that I thoroughly enjoy. Everything's connected here, And it can all be accessed if you know how. Sasori said, growing a small sinister smile. A few more taps were made before several numbers started shifting in the right-hand corner of the screen. Impressive, Itachi replied simply. Glad you don't need the Sharingan to see that, Sasori replied, leaning back in his chair. This world's currency is more digital or computer-based than back in the elemental nations, but money is still money. Kakaza must be having a field day if he's here, Itachi remarked. Indeed, Sasori replied, with his eyes shifting to the topic that the masked ninja's name brought up. Which leads us back to finding out if anyone else is here. And we do that how exactly? Very carefully, Sasori replied before pressing a few more buttons on his keyboard. Couldn't we just ask these superheroes for help? Brilliant idea. And while we're at it, let's tell them how we tried to destroy the world, how you killed your entire family, and anything Hayden ever did. I'm sure we'd hit it off. Itachi glared at him, not appreciating the sarcasm as Sasori explained. These superheroes are too simple-minded. Their world operates on a system of black and white. I'm uncertain how they will treat us if they were to know about it, and I do my best to avoid uncertainties these days. After a brief bout of thought, Itachi sighed in agreement. It would be a bad idea to get unknowns involved right now. So we have to do it ourselves then. Like always, Sasori added on. Last night, after you went to sleep, I got word to all my contacts to be on the lookout for any other members of our little group. But as you know, my network isn't what it used to be, so I wouldn't count on getting information quickly. And what am I to do until then? Learn, Sasori ordered. Properly. He turned his laptop towards the Uchiha and stood up from his chair. Itachi looked at him, then back to the computer. Did you familiarize yourself with the computers back home? Sasori asked, pulling out a smaller device from his pocket and tapping it. To an extent, Itachi replied, looking hesitantly at the laptop as he sat down in the chair. Good. You'll need it. Now just tap on the G icon and we'll get started. Itachi did so, surprised that touching the icon with his finger opened something new. Fascinating. Sasori nodded as he looked over the Uchiha's shoulder to make sure he adjusted properly. It was a cold, sunny day in Jump City. Strange considering it was settled nicely along the California coast, but nothing unheard of. Crime was down, and no world-ending events were currently on the horizon, so the Teen Titans found themselves goofing off in the living room of their tower. Raven was hovering quietly next to a coffee machine, reading what she considered to be a very interesting book. Cyborg and Beast Boy sat on their very comfortable black couch, and Robin sat opposite of Raven, about as engaged with his computer as Raven was with her book. Well, thanks for letting me know, asshole, Robin grumbled under his breath as the picture of a newly minted Gotham Robin article flashed behind the screen of his computer. Really, was it too much to ask for a heads up when you knighted a new sidekick? Especially when he has the same name? I did not know you had a brother, Starfire said, walking up to his side. I don't. This is a new kid, Robin replied. Who also calls himself Robin? Yeah. Just a miscommunication. I'll talk to him and see what gives, Robin said with a sigh. Starfire looked concerned. Batman, you mean? Yeah, he replied, a little too annoyed. He and I still don't quite get along. Yet we're going to see him in a few days, Starfire said, putting a hand on his shoulder. I want to put the past behind me. Only way I can do that is to finally talk to them about it, Robin replied, taking her hand in his. You're still coming, right? Tamaran doesn't have a holiday I don't know about this time of year? Oh yes. I am most looking forward to meeting your other friends in Gotham. Yo! A familiar voice called out over to the pair. What? Robin asked across the room over to his friend. So just to be clear, Huntress isn't available? Cyborg asked, leaning back against the couch. I told you she's going out with Question, Robin replied, annoyed. But the dude has no face. Beast Boy whined beside his mechanical friend. How does that even work? I don't know. Why are you two even asking that? Robin exclaimed. Dude, we're going to Gotham, Beast Boy exclaimed. Black Canary, Huntress, Batgirl, how can you not be excited? Robin resisted the urge to smack his forehead and settled for just sighing. Raven did the same as Starfire smiled at the excitement Beast Boy was emitting. Just as he began to yell out a reply, a blinding white light flared across the entire tower, blinding all of the Titans at once before almost instantly fading out. What the hell? Cyborg asked, quickly scanning the outside view with his cybernetic eye. Cyborg, what do you see? Robin asked, readying himself for a fight. Are we under attack? Starfire called out, her hands quickly adopting a light green aura. I don't think so. I don't see. Wait. Cyborg zoomed further out as the vision in his other eye finally began to return. Something just fell into the ocean. Titans go, Robin ordered. The windows all along the living room slid down as the five flew out of the tower and over the ocean. Cyborg's eyes kept itself locked on the very faint heat signature in the shape of a human as it sank deeper into the winter ocean. It wasn't moving. It's definitely a person. And it doesn't look like he's out for an afternoon swim, Cyborg said, standing on the platform Raven had just created. He's not gonna last long in the water, Beast Boy, Robin said as he held onto Starfire's arm. Beast Boy nodded from his hawk form and quickly dove straight down into the bay, shifting into a large green bear just as he impacted. A few moments later he sprung back up to the surface with the naked body of an alarmingly thin man, pale as snow, and just as cold, laid on his back. Dudes! The guy is naked. I can see that. Raven sighed as a black aura gripped the man's body, shielding it from view save for his head. It sported pure crimson hair that draped over his eyes and partially hid a frighteningly thin face that, combined with the rest of his body, showed that he really wasn't in good health. He's barely breathing. Let's get him to the tower, Cyborg said, getting a much better scan of the man's body. He's really going to need it. As Itachi acquainted himself with this new world via internet, Sasori felt vibration of his phone hit from his pocket. He left the room swiftly after reading the caller ID. Now on the still snowy roof, Sasori answered the phone. Doug, I wasn't expecting your call so soon. Things have been heating up here, boss, a clearly panicked voice replied. Two-Face moving in on Penguin's territory already? Who? Any particular reason? Sasori, staring at the glistening snow. You know how he is. Just flipped the goddamned coin of his and decided we're moving. Sasori bit his lower lip in annoyance. Chance had always been an enemy for him. When? Tonight. Oh, rumor has it Batman was at the docks last night. He usually makes his rounds there every one other night. What's so special about this one? Sasori asked. Because Jacob contacted me this morning. Penguin's pissed off something fierce about Gotham PD seizing a shipping container. Courtesy of the Bat Freak, Doug replied. His newest batch of weapons? Not the usual stuff, according to Jacob. Whatever was in this one costs 4 times what Penji usually pays. I see. Sasori nodded, understanding. But if it's still something that minor, why'd you contact me? Jacob's been found out. Penji's planning on feeding him to that shark of his in the iceberg lounge right after he spills everything about you, me, and the entire group. God damn it. Sasori gripped his phone so hard that it threatened to start cracking. Any time in particular? He said he wouldn't live to see tomorrow. What's the plan? Doug asked. It was simple. Jacob had become a loose end. It was time to tie him up. Sasori took his free hand and made a hand sign. Jacob has served me well, Sasori started before his eyes widened. You can't just treat people like they're tools. A sharp feminine cry echoed into his mind. The voice vanished quickly afterwards, but the damage had been done. Despite his brain's orders, his body couldn't activate a mind destruction jutsu. Sasori released a low, frustrated growl before speaking back. And he will continue to do so. I'll take care of it. Gotcha, boss. I'll keep you informed on Two-Face. Sasori hung up shortly after. He took a deep breath and looked out over the highways going in and out of Gotham, then finally to the towering skyscrapers of Gotham itself that almost seemed to sparkle under the sun. Damn it all, he growled. He was going to have to get directly involved for the sake of his underlings, and it annoyed him to no end. Ah well, at the very least he could use the exercise. No data available. That damn statement had been repeating itself ever since Batgirl had logged into the Bat computer. Itachi Uchiha must have really been an enigma if Batman didn't have anything on him. I take it nothing of use, Ms. Gordon? Alfred asked, bring her a small tray of tea. Batgirl thanked him and nodded. Not a single detail. I figured he was new, but I honestly thought Bruce would have something on him. Master Bruce likes to appear he knows everything about everyone. He doesn't? Batgirl asked in mock surprise. Usually he does. But there are those he can overlook or hasn't had time to focus on. Do you remember that one young man he met who managed to escape him? Not really. Batgirl answered, trying to remember. What did he look like? Bruce didn't get a decent picture of his face, but he mentioned that his hair was one of the reddest he had ever seen. Alfred replied. But anyway, my point stands. If Master Bruce could be everywhere and know everything, he would hardly need the rest of us, would he? He finished with a smile that spread tobacco. Yeah. Fair enough. Her thoughts drifted back to Itachi. It's just something about this guy felt different. She remembered his admission that his parents taught him how to kill. Did we have anything on the League of Shadows recently? Batgirl asked. I can ask Question and Huntress to look into them for you. Thanks, Alfred. Batgirl replied as the elder smiled back. No thanks are necessary. Though I must ask you to take special care of Master Drake tonight. Will do. Batgirl nodded. He was right. Tonight's patrol took them to the Iceberg Lounge. Not exactly a place to let your guard down. The door to the Titan's infirmary slid open with a light hum as Robin walked in to see their new guest. Said guest was currently lying unconscious in a small comfortable custom-made hospital bed as his cyborg continued to stand over and scan his vitals as well as any other information he could decipher from the very weak red head. I'm surprised you're still here. I thought some trouble was brewing downtown. Cyborg said to his friend. Nothing unusual, Star BB, and Ray got it, Robin replied quickly as he walked up beside him. Anything new? Nothing really. He's unconscious, weak and almost scarily thin. Cyborg said, continuing to peer over his patient. Well, it is actually a little worse than that. What do you mean? I took several X-rays of his body before hooking up to the machine. This guy's been through a lot. Cyborg replied as several pictures of the man's bone structure became visible. Robin peered through each photo before focusing on one particular one located on the spine. What the? Robin said, glaring at almost a dozen small black rods of metal lodged all along the man's back, just barely hidden beneath the skin, 3 of which looked like they were piercing the spine itself. Yeah. Jesus, right? Cyborg agreed, pointing to the pierced spinal points. Can he even walk? That's another weird thing. It looks the vertebrae somehow fused with the rods. Same for the other bones all along his back. I've never seen anything like it. Any idea how he got them? Considering how he looks, it can't have been willingly. Cyborg said as the X-rays vanished. I'm pretty sure I can heal him up fine, but there's still that blinding light he appeared from. What's the plan here? Should we tell the League? Let's talk to him before we do anything. I don't want to assume anything about this guy, and getting the League involved would bring a bunch of attention I don't want right now. Robin said, looking over to the redhead with an unreadable expression. Gotcha. Cyborg replied. I hope this guy wakes up before we go to Gotham, though. I'm not leaving him alone in the tower. Cyborg then turned back to the patient and over to his friend. Speaking of which, are you gonna be okay going back there? If I wasn't, I wouldn't be going back. Robin answered, slightly annoyed. Look, I've put that behind me. And I'm hoping they did too. Great. So what happens when Star finds out? Cyborg asked. Robin's posture stiffened as he realized hadn't really found a way around that. I think the best thing to do would be to not tell her. Flawless thinking. Puts the robot in me to shame. Cyborg said, giving him a false salute. Look, I'll deal with it, okay? Robin defended. Cyborg chuckled to his friend before slapping him on the back. Relax, man, it's gonna be a lot easier than you think it'll be. Cyborg assured him. So you've had a girlfriend who cheated on you with your mentor? Well, no. Cyborg replied, being honest. Robin slapped his head in annoyance as Cyborg chuckled. I meant, it's only gonna be as awkward as you make it. Just try and catch up with them and forget about it. It's what I try to do whenever I meet my folks. You were on bad terms? Robin asked, surprised. For a while. Me and Dad didn't exactly see eye to eye when I decided to do the hero thing full time. Cyborg explained. And it took us a while to actually sit down and hash it out. But we got there. Same thing will happen with you and Batman. I'm sure of it. It's still going to be a pain in the ass, though. I never said it wasn't gonna be. Cyborg agreed. Both of them laughed lightly as, unknown to either of them, the eyes of the man in the bed twitched ever so slightly at the mention of pain. Itachi had just finished reading a summarized history of the United States thanks to a website called Wikipedia when Sasori re-entered the room. We're gonna have to cut your history lesson short. Sasori interjected. We've got something to take care of. And what is that exactly? Itachi asked, closing the monitor and rubbing his slightly strained eyes. Have you found out about any of the others? No. And if we don't hurry, someone will find out about me. Sasori replied, getting Itachi's attention. Come with me. Itachi followed the redhead to the back end of the high-tech room and watched as he pressed his hand up to a monitor. There was a slight buzzing noise before a series of locks went off and a portion of the wall opened up to reveal a small armory containing several packs of kunai and shuriken, and a no small amount of handguns. "You've been busy," Itachi said, glancing over the items and grabbing at 2 or 3 packs of ninja weaponry. "I'll be damned before I'm unprepared," Sasori responded, doing the same as well as taking a pair of small pistols. He noticed Itachi not grabbing one. "You don't want one?" "Won't need it," Itachi replied, strapping a pack of kunai to his right arm, a pack of shuriken to his left, and a second pack of kunai to his left leg. "You'll also need some new clothes. More when the action picks up," Sasori said, throwing him the bag he had brought back into the room with him. Itachi opened up the bag, revealing a very fancy-looking black suit complete with matching shoes, vest and tie. "Where exactly are we going, Sasori?" "The Iceberg Lounge," Sasori replied. "One of the strongholds for a crime lord known as the Penguin." The Penguin? Itachi started, trying to hold back a slight chuckle. "A stupid name certainly, but he's not to be underestimated," Sasori spoke, taking out a suit of his own. "But with luck we'll be in and out before he notices." "Any particular reason for this excursion, Sasori?" Itachi asked as he started to put on the suit. "I told you, he has sensitive information. I want it back," Sasori replied simply. Itachi's eyes lingered on the redhead, wondering what that actually meant. It was a blisteringly cold and snowy night in Smallville when Clark and Lois finally spotted his family farm. "Is that it?" Lois asked, clearly hoping to get out of the car. "Yep, home sweet home," Clark answered. "Finally." She sighed in relief before looking at everything that surrounded it. "Geez. Really don't have to worry about neighbors, huh?" "What are you complaining about?" Clark asked back. "There's nothing out here. Just fields and snow." "Nothing like small-town America," Clark agreed. "Christ, you know what you are, Clark. You're the textbook definition of sappy." "Guilty as charged," Clark once again agreed. "I bet I could give Superman a run for his money." "Don't get your hopes up, Smallville," Lois replied, pulling their rental car up to the Kent driveway. Clark winked to her as he got out, and she sighed in response. This was really happening. Lois Lane was going to spend the holidays in the middle of nowhere house, far from any possible excitement. Just great. "Ma. Pa. You up there?" Clark asked up to a figure who looked like he was shoveling snow off the roof. "Clark." An older woman's voice rang out from the porch. Lois looked over to see a gray-haired woman walk out cloaked in a light jacket. Soon enough, she was engulfed by Clark, who practically lifted off the ground in a hug. "The snow didn't keep you, did it?" "No worse than usual, Ma," Clark replied with a loving smile. He led her back down and looked over to Lois. "Lois, this is Martha, Kentucky." "Oh, hi." She waved awkwardly to the elderly mother. Martha laughed lightly at the scene. "Wow. So this is the famous Lois Lane," she said, walking over to her. "She's quite the looker," she said, causing Clark to rub the back of his head sheepishly as she greeted the famous reporter. "Maybe a bit too thin, but I'm sure that's just that Metropolis fast food. We'll put a little meat on your bones before you leave, dear. Don't worry," she said, shaking Lois' hand with a surprisingly firm grip for a woman her age. It wasn't fierce though, just energetic. "Some food actually sounds great right now," Lois said. "Don't worry, dear. Jonathan's inside warming up some ham." "Inside?" Lois asked, thinking back up to the roof. "Then who was shoveling the snow?" "Oh, that's right," Martha said, snapping her fingers in realizations and looking back put to the roof. "You can call it a night, dear. Snow'll be there tomorrow." Lois and Clark looked up as well, trying to get a better look at the figure. "Is there a ladder or—" She could barely finish as the figure slid down the side of the roof, flipped beautifully through the air and landed smack dab right beside Lois, who nearly fell back in surprise. It turned out he was a she, garbed in a thick dark blue jacket and 2 pairs of jeans that were tied loosely to her waist by a belt. Nothing really that outstanding until you saw her long pure blue hair and orange eyes. "Whoa," Clark said, surprised by the display of agility. "Ma, who's this?" "Conan," the woman replied in a cold voice before Martha could speak. "My name is Conan." As the moon shined down clearly over Gotham, Itachi and Sasori left their home and made their way to their new destination. Or rather, Sasori made his way there, and Itachi just followed, leaping from building to building so as to not be slowed down by either traffic or onlookers. On one particularly high up rooftop, though, the pair stopped. You said you hadn't gotten a chance to look at the stars yet, right? Sasori asked, tilting his head up towards the sky. Itachi shook his head as he did the same. Well, thanks to the lights of this city you won't be able to get the whole picture, but you should still be able to realize something. Sasori finished. Itachi squinted towards the sky, trying to get a good look past the bright moon and to the surrounding stars. What he saw, or rather what he didn't see, widened his eyes. Not a single star from the elemental nations was to be seen. Sure, it made technical sense considering the apparent lack of anything related to their home, but it was nevertheless jarring to behold. It took me a while to get used to that, Sasori said. And I'm still trying to digest the idea that several of those stars are actually home to other livable planets. Itachi's eyes widened yet again at the thought. But before he could think on it further, Sasori took off back to his objective, and Itachi swiftly did the same. So, where's she from? Clark asked, clearly curious about the woman who was staying in his old home. It's the damnedest thing. We found her out in the cold about a month ago. Naked as the day you were born and frozen half to death, Jonathan replied after chewing on a small piece of cold ham. She took a few days to heal back up, and you know how impassable the road is this time of year, so we just offered her a place to stay. And you don't get any bad vibes from her? Clark asked, turning his head to peer back inside the house. His gaze peered through the walls to see his mother currently chatting with Lois and Conan sitting on the couch making origami. No, actually. She's a little quiet and can come across as cold, but she's clearly been through some shit. What do you mean? Clark asked. Well, her body was littered with scars when I found her, for one thing. Some pretty damn old ones, too. And she can't be more than 35. Jonathan replied, looking out to his many acres of empty snow-covered land. And I don't think she's shown you yet, but she's real good with paper. She's a meta? I'm no expert on that, so don't ask me, Jonathan replied. Look, all can say is she's good-hearted. She's been helping around the farm since she's been on her feet. And you know HEW this place can be in winter. It's been nice to have extra pair of hands here again. Well, as long as she okay. Though I was worried you were gonna replace Mom. You know that's not a bad idea, Jonathan. I heard that. A voice replied from inside the house. Clark and Jonathan laughed while Lois and Martha shared a chuckle of their own. Conan, for her part, looked at the two conversing women and thought back to the friends she had lost who now seemed to be gone forever. We'll always be together, Conan, Yahiko said, wrapping his arm around her neck lovingly. It's a promise. An equally young Nagato with purple spiraled eyes agreed. Time, however, would prove to make that promise impossible to keep. One by one her friends left this world before she too left the world of the shinobi for what was supposed to have been forever. Really, the last thing she expected was wake up cold and naked in the snow. Where she was or how she got there were questions she could barely comprehend. She was fairly certain she had been killed. She tried her best to stop Madara, but her best wasn't enough. She accepted that as he crushed her throat and resigned herself to her fate with the hope that the blonde that had renewed her hope as well as Nagato's would find a way to beat him. What she could comprehend, however, was the care that these two elders gave her. A warm room, food, a bed, some clothes. All of which they had given freely. It had been far too long since she had experienced such kindness, and felt a need to try and repay it for as long as she would stay here. Wherever here was, anyway. Hot chocolate? A voice asked, bringing Conan back to the present. Conan looked over to see the black-haired woman who had just arrived at the farm. She looked at the red mug that the woman held before reaching for it. Thank you, she said swiftly, almost devoid from all emotion save for a small hint of nostalgia in her voice that Lois's reporter ears picked up on. I didn't interrupt something, did I? Lois said, sitting down beside her. Conan didn't reply, instead focusing back to the snow that continued to fall from behind the window. I guess I did, huh? Lois said with a light chuckle. Sorry about that. It's perfectly fine, Conan replied. Just remembering some friends is all. Ah. An activity tailor-made for this time of year, Jonathan said, entering the living room with his son. I usually think of a few friends I've lost over the years as well. You and me both, Martha spoke up. Remember the Fitzgivens? From before Clark was born? Damn right I do, Jonathan replied. Gone way before their time. What about you, son? I usually think back to Dan, Clark said, growing a nostalgic smile. You remember him, Lois? He wasn't exactly the forgettable type, Lois agreed, remembering the outspoken man who had been murdered tragically by Darkseid years ago. Then again, it's hard to forget the people who've left a mark on you, Lois continued. The other four in the room nodded in agreement. Oh, Conan dear, could you show them that trick you do? Martha asked, eager to change the subject before everyone got too down. Conan nodded and looked over to the perfectly folded origami crane that sat on the table. Seconds later, its paper wings began to flap and its head bobbed up and down as it flew into the air and began circling all around them. Lois and Clark looked shocked by the display while Martha and Jonathan looked on for what must have been the 100th time in all. My teacher taught me about origami when I was little. He called these types of birds paper angels, Conan said, once again thinking about someone she had lost as a small river of guilt flooded through her. Lois looked like she noticed it but decided to keep that information to herself as the five of them decided it was time for supper. Itachi wasn't really sure what to expect following Sasori, who kept the same look of detachment on his face he had always shown. He seemed his usual calm, emotionless self, but something else was there now. A strange sort of spark that was barely visible in his eyes. It wasn't panic. Or at least he didn't think it was too subdued. Curiosity? No, that didn't fit. There was still a speck of alarm in there. Whatever it was surprisingly human. That was probably why it seemed so off-putting. His body wasn't that of an unfeeling puppet anymore. He could actually portray human emotion now without his voice. The pair stopped on a rooftop that sat comfortably across a very busy street from a large, 10-story tall building littered with bright flashing neon signs in the form of women as well as pure golden letters that spelling out the words Iceberg Lounge proudly on the front of the building. Not very subtle, is he? Subtlety is a lost art in this world if you asked me. Sasori replied, looking down at the frankly obscene amount of cars that seemed to be trying to get into the lounge's parking area. His eyes followed a couple of wealthy townspeople exit their vehicle, then walked off towards a small line of other similarly well-off people who all looked to be chatting comfortably in their warm fur coats and jackets as they waited to be served. Itachi's eyes focused more on a few key figures at the entrance. All slightly taller and each wearing matching tuxedos that seemed far too tight around their large frames. Security. The ones he wants us to see anyway. It's a good signal to outside players that he's not to be messed with, Sasori said. Like we're about to do? Exactly, Sasori replied, his eyes darting up and down the outside of the building, taking in any obvious structural weaknesses that could be exploited if it came to it. The lounge is part casino, part show, and part restaurant. But it also houses a majority of Penguin's criminal dealings. Illegal arms, money laundering, private vault. He keeps most of it here. So how's this going to work then? Itachi asked, surveying their surroundings as well. My contact gave me a detailed list of several of those caches which are located in specially marked, hidden rooms. You'll cause a distraction that will lock all those down and send security that way. If this all goes south, anyway, Itachi answered. So what's the regular plan then? Blend in, Sasori replied, handing him a wallet. Itachi took it and saw a picture of himself on a card marked driver's license, and several cards each with rows of numbers. It also contained a fair amount of green paper bills that were this place's currency. You'll act as my security and have the time of your life while I search for my contact. Kenta Tokugawa? Itachi asked, raising an eyebrow as he read the name off the driver's license. That's right, Kenta, and from here on out it's Mr. Kobayashi, Sasori replied, gesturing to his own wallet. Oh, and take this. Itachi caught a small white dot in his hand. Place it in your ear. Think of it as a small headset. Simply press and hold on it, and I'll be able to hear you. Understood, Kenta said with a nod, placing the dot in his ear. So we just jump in line and wait. What's the one thing I made sure you all knew about me when we met? Kobayashi asked, slightly annoyed at the question. Kenta could have laughed as he remembered. Right. You hate waiting. At least something's never changed. The pair leapt quietly down to the alley below before crossing the street. As the cold, crisp air hit both their faces, Batgirl had to admit, Tim was taking to this like a natural. He didn't have a background in gymnastics or a basic knowledge of fighting like her dad had taught her. And he certainly didn't have decades of travel that had gifted Bruce with his skills. Yet in the past few days, and even since he had figured who they all were, he had picked up everything involved with this type of life, exceptionally well. Especially the detective work, which to her mind was going to be just as good as Batman's if not better one day. Wahoo! He screamed with a smile plastered to his face, as the grapple line pulled him to a nearby rooftop. Once there, he flipped through air and landed in a roll atop the gray cement. Batgirl followed just as quickly, though perhaps with a little less enthusiasm. Woohoo? Really? What? Tim asked back, blinking behind his white eye mask. How do you and Batman not enjoy this? Because we have jobs to do, Batgirl replied with a stern gesture over the building that would be their prime site for the night. Cobblepot's guys are usually up to something around the holidays. Sure, but I've going over his gang's patterns for a while. Tim replied, gazing towards the building then back to Batgirl. Nothing's really new in the past few weeks. Except that warehouse shipment, Barbara corrected. Well, yeah, there was that, Tim replied, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. Look, hopefully you're right and this'll be uneventful. But always be prepared for this to go wrong fast. Gotcha, boss, Tim replied with such a lack of sarcasm that she nearly did a double take. Looks like rebellion wasn't really a thing she had to expect from him, and for that she was thankful. Just as she turned away to stare at the line of people who were waiting to get inside the infamous lounge, by almost pure coincidence, she spotted a pair of men just outside the line standing near the entrance talking to a security guard. One of those men, though, was the very same Metis she had met at the restaurant. See something? Tim asked, looking in her direction. Remember that guy I told you about? Batgirl asked. Red eyes? Yeah, you see him? Tim asked. Yep, Batgirl replied as the security guard bowed his head and led him as well as the redhead with him inside the lounge. Calling it a night, Pop? Clark asked as his father started after his mother, whose shadow had just disappeared up the stairs. Yeah, it's getting a bit harder to keep the eyes open, Jonathan replied, rubbing his eyes' hazel pupils. I'll leave the house to you until I get back up. Sure thing, Clark replied with a nod as Jonathan's hand grasped his shoulder. Glad to have you home, son. You and Lois, Jonathan said with a wink to his son, who simply smiled back and hugged him. When Clark came back to the living room, he fought back a sigh as Lois sat there, pen and notebook in hand, writing down whatever Conan answered her questions. Conan, for her part, looked confused by the effort and speed with which Lois was chronicling her answers, but didn't think too much of it. So you didn't get your powers in an accident? Lois asked. Accident? Conan asked, surprised by the question. You know, struck by lightning? Or maybe you got a radioactive paper cut? Clark had himself a good laugh as Lois turned over to him. What? Don't act like it couldn't happen. No, Conan replied, shaking her head. Nothing like that. I simply trained. Training, huh? Lois asked. What type exactly? Endurance, chakra manipulation, mediation. It was pretty all-encompassing. Chakra manipulation? Lois repeated back with a raised eyebrow as her pen darted across her notebook. That was certainly a new one. Yes. Though I'm not sure if that means anything to you, Conan replied. The Kents didn't seem to have any knowledge of the elemental nations or what goes on in them. Once again Lois's pen dashed across her paper as Clark leaned forward to listen, his interest piqued. Elemental nations? Clark asked. Is that where you're from? Yes, she replied. I was a shinobi from Amagakure before. Her voice suddenly stopped as Lois, and especially Clark, each noticed a glint of pain return to her eyes. Conan rubbed her neck as her body began to tense up. Hey, it's okay, Lois said, dropping her pen and reaching over to wrap her hand around Conan's hand. We can stop now if you're not feeling up to it. Conan didn't reply with words, instead settling for a swift nod and sigh of relief as she got up and walked out onto the back porch. Lois looked over to Clark, concerned as Clark did the same. She's definitely been through something. Yeah, Clark said with a small nod as he looked out towards the back door with a look of pity. Amagakure? Any idea what that is? Not a clue. If I had to guess, it's probably Asian, but like I said, just a guess, Lois replied just in time for a yawn to make its way from her mouth. Much to Clark's amusement. Don't you say a word. Lois cut him off before he could start. What? Clark asked, keeping his smile. You're gonna say something cheesy about me being tired, and right now I don't want to hit you. Lois glaring at him. Clark allowed himself another laugh as Lois sighed. Well, I'm gonna call it a night. You. I'll stay up a little longer, Clark replied. You taking the guest room? Conan's got that. I'm taking yours, Lois said. Mine? Why, thanks for offering, Lois replied with a wink as she moved to the same stairs that his parents had disappeared up to. Clark could do little but sigh as she vanished, and the sound of a door shutting came to his ears. After making a quick trip to fridge then the sink, he walked outside. You want a drink? Clark asked as he sat down beside her in a separate rocking chair. I'm adequate, she replied, shaking her head. Clark nodded and took a sip from a poured glass of water before settling into the rocking motions that the chair allowed. For a while, they just sat in silence. taking in the snow-covered fields that still shined under the moonlight and the cold crisp air that flew around them with every occasional breeze. It was serene. The very definition of calm. She wanted you to follow, Conan suddenly said just as Clark took another drink which nearly went spewing from his mouth. The sound of coughing soon followed. What? He asked, covering his mouth, trying to calm himself. Your friend, Lois. She wanted you to follow her up to your room. Clark didn't really know how to respond other than taking in the fact that Conan could hear better than most. He didn't have to, however, as Conan's lips formed a small smile. It seems you men are just as oblivious here as you are back home. Speaking of which, Clark said, eager to get on a different subject, I'd like to talk to you about it. Do you think your league would know where home is? Conan asked as she finally turned her head to face him. Clark's eyes widened and his words caught his throat. Conan was tempted to laugh at the sight. Don't act so surprised. It doesn't take a genius to see you and the Superman from the TV look exactly the same. The glasses don't do much to distract, Conan said, gesturing to the spectacles that sat across his nose. Clark took off his glasses and looked at them before chuckling. You'd be surprised. They can actually fool most people. Perhaps I'm a bit more perceptive than most, Conan admitted. But getting back to the point. Your league, would you be willing to help? That's kind of what we do, Clark said, putting his glasses back on. Though I have to correct you on something. It's not my league. You are supposedly their most powerful member, as well as the one who created it if the TV is to be believed. Why would it not be yours? Clark didn't respond at first. It was an honest question, and she wasn't the first to ask it, but nevertheless he always tried to give a different reason for his thinking that also held just as true as the others. Because I thought I didn't need anyone else, Clark replied, looking back up to the sky. I'm not sure what you've seen on my parents' TV, but for the longest time I worked on my own. I was the strongest person I knew, so I thought working with anyone else would just get them hurt, or worse in the long run. Conan didn't give any physical gesture, but she understood the reasoning. Then, one day, there was a threat that I just couldn't stop on my own. No single hero could. Conan's eyes noticed a subtle shift in Clark's eyes as he thought back to what she could only guess was a pretty disturbing memory. We had to work together. And in doing so, we saved the planet. Clark's eyes fell back to her as she wondered what an achievement like that must have looked like. That taught me, more than anything else, we're only as strong as our comrades. And that belief is a core part of the league. I can't take credit for it any more than they can. It's not my league. It's not their league. It's just the league. Conan's own gaze shifted away from his, and soon it was his turn to notice a subtle change in her gaze, one that indicated she was thinking back to a memory herself. Were you part of a group like that? In a way, Conan finished with a strange tone that Clark couldn't really nail down. Sadness? Regret? Anger? All three? It was up in the air and he could do little but wonder which one it actually was, or if it was something different altogether. The energy in the Iceberg Lounge would have given a nuclear reactor a run for its money. The entire place was buzzing with hundreds of people talking, laughing, gambling, dancing, crying. It was a city unto itself, and a sight Itachi had honestly never seen. He had never been much of a gambler himself, and had learned that those who favor casinos often end up losing rather than gaining. Sasori, however, was very much proving his teachings wrong. Raise 5,000. Kobayashi said, giving his signature blank face to the only person at the table who still held a hand of cards as he tossed a few chips from his pile onto the table. Said man looked to be an unassuming businessman who was more than likely here to spend his weekly earnings. The man grinned, clearly thinking the redhead was bluffing, and tossed in the matching amount before shoving his entire collection of chips towards the center of the table. All in. The pot now stood at a very hefty 368,000 as the both former players and onlookers gathered around the table to see which of the two men would come out on top. Kobayashi nodded slightly at the increase, looked down towards his hand, and did the same, signaling to Kenta to move his chips in as well. 468,000. As if on K, the man struggled to hold back a laugh as he threw down his cards. A diamond straight of 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. A decent hand to say the least. Kobayashi did the same, keeping his emotionless face contrasting that of his opponents, as sequence of clubs came into everyone's view. 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. The poor man's face faltered as he realized what just happened. His skin paled, his eyes darting back and forth from his hand to Kobayashi's. Just the crowd around them murmured to themselves, impressed at the man's luck or skill. Kenta himself had to give him credit. He never would have taken the redhead for a fan of poker. Good match, he said, standing up. Kenta nodded and gathered the pile of chips as the crowd dispersed. I see why they let you right in, Kenta said, putting the chips into a case. How do you think I first made money? Kobayashi asked back as the pair started their journey to the main desk of the casino. A lot of money, if the reactions from outside were to be believed. Itachi replied, remembering how they skipped the line outside and figuring that took more than just money. So you know Penguin himself? Oswald Cobblepot. Get any laughs out now before he meets you. Sasori replied just as a smile spread across Itachi's face. Cobblepot. He allowed himself a snicker at the name before becoming stoic. The names just keep getting stranger. Get used to it. Sasori whispered, coming to a woman who sat behind a sealed-off counter. Cash these, please. The night's still young, Kobayashi. A new distinct voice rang out from behind the pair. The pair turned to see a rather odd-looking man dressed in a very aristocratic black and white waistcoat and matching pants. Topped off with a large black hat that sat above a bald head and decently scared face, sporting a monocle in his right eye. Retiring already? Mr. Cobblepot. Kobayashi replied, giving the man a small bow of respect. Kenta did the same, glancing at the man as well as his two large, equally well-dressed bodyguards who stood comfortably behind him. I wasn't aware you were available. Good night so far? Very good. Penguin replied with a grin that showed of a set of almost pure white teeth save for a single gold tooth that seemed to sparkle. People are happy. People are spending. And even a few are winning. Penguin gestured to the case of chips that Kenta held. You haven't lost your edge at the table. A skill learned is hard to unlearn, Kobayashi replied. A fairly successful night, all things considered. Perhaps you'd like to sit at the big boys' table? Penguin interrupted. Kobayashi and Kenta shared a quick look before replying. If there's a seat available. Kobayashi started as Penguin's smile grew. Splendid. Penguin replied, clasping his hands together. Just follow. He stopped as he finally noticed the man next to him. Well, you've brought some company. Mr. Cobblepot. My associate Kenta Tokugawa, ex-Yakuza. Really? Penguin eyes scanned over him, taking in his size, muscle mass, and overall demeanor. The Yakuza are some crazy bastards. You got someone out for your blood? No more than usual, Kobayashi replied quickly and injecting a bit of humor into his voice. Cobblepot laughed. Quite. Well, you know the rules. He stays here and enjoys himself. Sir Kenta began. Kobayashi will be taken care of, I assure you. Penguin interrupted as a tone of annoyance entered his voice. Unless that's a problem, of course. Kobayashi turned to his companion and shook his head. Kenta nodded at the action and took a step back. Let on, Mr. Cobblepot, Kobayashi replied. Excellent. Right this way, he said, flipping around and walking out of sight as his two guards escorted him and Kobayashi. Once they were gone from his sight, he decided to head to the bar for a quick drink before proceeding any further. He took a seat at the counter and called out the bartender. Sake. Sorry, guy. I just clocked out. Other guy will be here in a sec. The frankly exhausted lady replied, rubbing her eyes and disappearing behind a door. Itachi nodded and spun around in his chair to look at all the people who darted across the floor in either happiness or agony. Those were really the only two emotions you could find in abundance in a casino if you asked him. When the door opened back up, Itachi opened his mouth to repeat the request. He was beaten to it. Sake, right? A gruff, annoyed voice asked. Yes. Itachi tilted his head at the slightly familiar voice. Maybe he heard it wrong. Not a second later. The sound of glass breaking just a few feet away caught his and the bartender's attention. One man who clearly felt wronged held the other by his shirt up against the wall. You piece of shit. Dude, what the hell? You think you can just walk right in and hit on my wife? I was just making some conversation. Conversation? The aggressor yelled, pulling his arm back. God damn it. The voice behind Itachi growled. The next thing Itachi knew, a fist plowed into the aggressor's cheek. Two things separated it from a regular punch, however. First, it held enough power to knock the man off his feet and sent him flying across the room, narrowly missing a small group of people who had gathered to watch the fight. Second, the fist that had hit the poor bastard was attacked to an arm that had extended out of the man behind him via purple threads. Lounge policy. No goddamn fights on the casino floor. The bartender growled out over to the crowd as his arms slithered back across the air and into his sleeve at an unnerving speed. Paying no mind to their confused gazes, he simply moved to prepare Kenta's drink. Assholes, don't pay me enough for this. There really was no doubt who the man was now. Kenta turned to finally get a picture of him. He was tall and instantly gave of a dangerous aura to anyone who saw his frame. Draped in a gray button-up short-sleeved shirt and black slacks, it strangely matched the face of its owner, who sported long, rough-looking brown hair that stretched down to the back of his neck. The man's mouth and chin were blocked from view by a black mask, but seeing his green-white eyes made it plain as day who he was. At least to anyone who knew him. "Right, one sake," the bartender said, placing the full shot glass right next to Kenta, seemingly not noticing who he was. He then went about cleaning the various glasses that sat on the table behind him with grace and efficiency that gave the impression that he'd been doing this for a while. "Actually, I'll take 2," Kenta said. "Someone's feeling lucky tonight," the bartender said, dropping his rag and grabbing the sake bottle once again. "Another glass too," Kenta continued. "Oh, someone so special that he doesn't drink from the same glass twice, huh?" the bartender asked with a sarcastic tone of respect. "You know, your type of people really piss me off." "Just what didn't piss you off, Kakazu?" Kenta asked just in time for the bartender to turn around and face him. The bartender froze at the name, save for the eyes that took in the sight of what was supposed to be a long-dead Uchiha staring right back at him. And right there, for the first time in his life, a small genuine smile started to form behind his mask. Yuichi placed the sake bottle on the table at risk of it slipping from his hand. "You've got to be kidding me." "Afraid not," Kenta replied, extending his hand across the counter. Kakazu wasted no time accepting it with a vigor Kenta had never seen before. "Itachi, you goddamn bastard," Kakazu chuckled. "Some asshole really screwed up if they forgot to send you to hell." Itachi smiled, pulling back his hand as Kakazu did the same. "Just what hell are you doing here?" "Working with Sasori," Itachi whispered to Kakazu. The ex-bounty hunter's eyes widened. "The redhead's here too?" Kakazu asked, surprised. "Just went off with Penguin," Itachi said. "Something about the big kids' table." "Shit," Kakazu said, impressed. "Looks like Sasori's been making some good money." "I'm surprised you and he haven't noticed each other," Itachi replied. "He seems to come here more often than not." "This is a new job," Kakazu clarified, rubbing his neck. "I just got to Gotham yesterday. Took some time off." "Time off?" Itachi asked. "I'll explain later," Kakazu said as couple sat down a few seats away and gestured over to him. "Bartender, 2 champagnes," the new arrival said as Kakazu moved over to them. As Itachi put finger to his ear. "Kakazu's here. Bartender." "Got it," came muffled whisper in reply through the device. "Ask about contact. Jacob." "You've got something to say, Kobayashi?" Penguin asked, looking across the table. Kobayashi turned his eyes away from his hand of cards to look at the crime lord. "Just thinking aloud, Mr. Cobblepot. Nothing interesting. Raise 200K. The redhead said, tossing in several more chips into the pile. "Bullshit," a deep voice growled out. A large man, maybe 7 feet, who sat across Kobayashi leaned forward, revealing the rough, ragged brown shirt, yellow eyes, and dark green scaled skin of a reptile, or more specifically a crocodile. "No jackass here mutters something without it having a purpose." "Really, what's that say about you, Croc?" another voice asked. His wasn't as deep as Croc's, but it held a veiled back annoyance that Sasori picked up on. The man was just as tall as Croc but lacked the scaled-up skin that made him famous. Instead, long thin tubes ran along the man's well-toned arms towards a container that sat strapped to his back. "You go on and on about how well a man's stomach tastes. Where's the purpose in that?" "Intimidation," Croc growled. "Oh, then you've been doing a shit job of it," the man replied, coldly smiling back at the set of teeth. An air of hatred began to fill the room as the 2 giants continued their stare down, seemingly waiting for the other to blink. Just as Penguin was about to step in, Kobayashi spoke. "Gentlemen, if Mr. Cobblepot invited you to this room, it stands to reason he views you as upstanding individuals. People who can look past their differences and come together for a quiet game. Do you really want to prove him wrong?" Kobayashi asked, returning his eyes to his cards. He could feel their stares turn back to him. "And what if I don't care?" Croc asked with a low growl. "Well, what else are you actually gonna do to pass the time that doesn't involve eating, killing, or fighting giant bats?" Kobayashi reasoned. His eyes drifted from Croc back to Bane, as each began to ponder the question rather than merely brush it off. Bane tilted his head slightly and gave a low chuckle, and Croc scratched the back of his head and allowed himself a disillusioned laugh. "Yeah, I guess you have a point there," Croc replied, picking his cards back up off the table. "Fair enough. Bane said with a short nod. A quiet night every once in a while works. Very good, gentlemen, Penguin said with a loud laugh and a nod to Kobayashi's direction. Kobayashi returned the gesture before moving to scratch his ear yet again. A swell of people came up to the bar after Kakuzu finished serving the couple. As he went on continuing his job, Itachi decided to pass the time with a few slot machines using a bit of the money Sasori had given him. Nothing really came of it. Closest he got was a pair of sevens and cherry. But he didn't leave disappointed. He took note of several figures moving about the lounge floor. They'd stop by someone at the desk, whisper something, disappear off the floor, come back and talk to someone else. The usual stuff. Itachi was sure that a criminally run casino staff would do. Or any casino staff for that matter. It was subtle too. No one else in the casino seemed to take notice it. Not the visible guards, none of the patrons, nobody really. Save for him and Kakuzu. An hour might have passed before Itachi moved back to the bar. Not content to sit and chat out in the open, Kakuzu allowed him behind the bar door and to a small, rustic lounge. Any luck on those machines? Kakuzu asked, pouring himself something from the bartender's private stash. Itachi shook his head. No more than usual. Yeah, luck was always a pain in the ass back home. Kakuzu agreed, pouring a second glass. He turned back to Itachi, who had quietly made his way to a leather chair. Itachi took it with a polite thank you. Mind you, we're pretty damn lucky to be here and not hell. How can you be sure it isn't? Itachi asked back with a smile. I'm still being paid, Kakuzu said with a smile under his mask. Quite handsomely, as a matter of fact. And demons can't be paid in hell? Itachi asked. The minute I read somewhere that demons are paid for their work, then I'll bite, Kakuzu said, gulping down the strange liquid. Itachi did the same, expecting a sake-like flavor. Instead, he was greeted with a powerful, hot taste that seemed to burn as it slid down his throat. He kept his composure though, finishing the glass before looking back to Kakuzu. That's a new one, Itachi said with a sigh. Whiskey. I've gotten a taste for it, Kakuzu said with a shrug of the shoulders. You might be more of wine guy. Pretty face and all. So you're bartending now? Itachi asked, raising an eyebrow to his masked comrade. Why is that so surprising? Kakuzu asked back, flatly cleaning his shot glass with a few quick wipes of the towel still kept in his pocket. It pays pretty good if you do it for the right people. Itachi couldn't argue with that. Kakuzu had always made himself pretty easy to read. Maybe he figured it would be less annoying if people could get who he was in a sentence or two. Whatever the case, Kakuzu was a pretty simple guy. He loved money and well, that was just about it. Maybe being an asshole was a close second, but even that it was a stretch. That simplicity had an odd charm to it. He never tried to hide who he was or what he thought. A rather honest characteristic for men in their position or former professions. That being said, I do have other jobs. This is more a hobby than anything else. Kakuzu continued, placing the glass on the counter. Such as? Stories for later, Kakuzu replied. What's up with you and Sasori? Planning to rob Cobblepot? In a way. Itachi nodded. Penguin captured an informant of his. Informant, bastard, still up to his old tricks, huh? Kakuzu said with annoyed sigh, though still wielding a smile. Can't say I'm much different. Who's he looking for? A man named Jacob. Sasori seems to think he'll be fed to a shark. Kakuzu's smile faded somewhat with another sigh. Goddamn. Jacob's really screwed then. Brutus in the basement. You know the shark's name? That's just what the boys call him, Kakuzu replied. Though don't get your hopes up. It's not Kisame. I didn't think it would be, Itachi said, standing back up. So where's the stairs? There's one right here, Kakuzu said, pointing over to a small corner of the room. False fire exit. Good, was Itachi's short reply, taking steps towards the door. Slow down, Kakuzu ordered. What exactly is the plan here, Uchiha? Just waltz right down and nab your boy. Itachi looked at his compatriot like he had grown a second head. Yes. It seemed pretty self-explanatory. Okay, I'm not sure you've noticed, but this world has some pretty powerful weapons. They'll put holes in you faster than you put them through your clan. A wave of anger swept through Uchiha for a brief moment, as he felt the urge remove 3 of the bounty hunters' hearts right then and there, but Kakuzu continued. It's not just down the stairs. It's then down more stairs to a long hallway armed to the teeth with armed guards with high-tech cameras, lasers, motion sensors, and a few other things that'll make even your movements easier to track. Sneak in if you can just walk in. Hell, maybe even get next to your guy. Well, that reply raised several questions. How did Kakuzu know exactly what to expect if he had just gotten to Gotham today, among others? But those would best be saved for later. What do you have in mind? Itachi asked. Come on. Think back to the academy days. Kakuzu with a light chuckle, cracking his knuckles. The answer came to Itachi instantly and a small smile grew across his face. Beast Boy woke with a start as the sound of thunder rang through his room and all over the tower. He hated when this happened. He could sleep in the rain just fine, but the second a loud bang hit, it was gone. He was wide awake, and it was almost too much of a chore to go back to sleep. He looked over to his clock. 9:45. He'd been asleep for maybe an hour. Another crash of thunder rang out, and he looked out his window to see the dark clouds and rain drops loudly tapping on the glass. Yep, he wouldn't be able to sleep through this. Leaving his room in a plain white sleeveless shirt and boxers, he began the journey to the kitchen for a nerve-easing snack. As the door to the tower's hub opened up, though, he was greeted by a familiar face with dark purple hair. Problem was, either had stopped moving until it was too late. Ouch. What the hell? Beast Boy growled out, clutching his forehead. Damn it, Beast Boy. Raven seethed, doing the same through gritted teeth. The pair stood there in mutual annoyed pain until it finally began to fade. What the hell are you doing up? I just asked you that. Beast Boy replied, still rubbing his emerald skin. I thought you liked storms, you know, with your matching personalities and all. Ha! Jackass. Raven grumbled, putting her hand back down to her side. Taking that as a challenge, Beast Boy quickly turned into a donkey and grinned at her before switching back. Guilty as charged. Look, I just wanted a drink to sleep on. All right? Raven said, still annoyed at her friend's antics. What's your excuse? Same. Though I was hoping for some food. Beast Boy hesitated for a split second as he thought he heard something. Raven took notice. What? She asked, confused by the action. Beast Boy's relief was evident. It must have just been the rain if Raven hadn't sensed anything. Nothing, he replied, focusing back on her. It was here he noticed that Raven wasn't exactly wearing her usual attire. Gone was her usual leotard and cape. Instead, she wore a simple blue top and, surprisingly, a pair of comfortable-looking gray shorts that made her look far too relaxed. Wow, so you do change clothes. Eyes up here, Garfield. She said, slightly amused by the words. It's not like you're wearing the same stuff. What? I can't stay in the uniform 24/7. Even I have standards, he said, crossing his arms. Mind you, I don't think I pull it off as good as you. Smooth, Gar. Smooth as silk, Raven said, walking past him and patting him on his shoulder. Someone will fall for that eventually. Beast Boy thought about shouting another compliment out to her but decided against it. He was probably pushing his luck as it was. Now in the kitchen, he pulled the door open to the fridge. His eyes flying from shelf to shelf looking for something, anything to eat and hopefully ease himself back to sleep. Cyborg had suggested some pills, but Beast Boy just didn't particularly care for them. He'd take them when he was sick, sure. But not to sleep. Not finding anything of value in the fridge, he settled for a carton of milk. He closed the fridge just in time to see a bright display of lightning flash across the tower's windows, illuminating the entire living room and kitchen, as well as a figure who stood almost motionless facing out to the rain. Beast Boy's guard shot up immediately, silently placing the carton of milk on the counter beside the fridge. After that, he made no movement at all, his eyes staring towards the figure in the living room. Still no movement. Maybe he hadn't noticed him. I did not mean to frighten you, the figure said weakly. Beast Boy allowed himself a sigh of relief. He could still be an enemy, but very few enemies he knew would greet him that way. You didn't frighten me, dude. I was just startled is all. Big difference. Of course, the figure replied with the same weak tone. Beast Boy then remembered they had another person with them. Someone who should have still been in the infirmary. Hey, are you okay? Beast Boy asked, walking slowly over to him, still not really knowing what to expect. The man didn't reply. With an annoyed groan, Beast Boy kept moving until he stood right next to the man. Another flash of lightning and he got a better look at him. What he saw was shocking. He was still thin, obviously, though the clothes Cyborg gave him painted a better picture than just being naked. His hair was blood red, so that was still the same. No, the thing that floored Beast Boy was the man's eyes. Orbs of shining purple that practically glowed in the dark as they stared out towards the stormy sea that surrounded the tower. It was a brief glance, but that glance spoke volumes to him. They held a power to them that he'd never seen before, but there was also a strong sadness to it. So much so that the two seemed to constantly be at war with each other. You are like the rain? Beast Boy asked. He slapped himself at the question. Honestly, what did that even mean? I do, the man replied with the thunder of the lightning flash accompanying his words. Okay, the storm really didn't help this guy's appearance. He looked more and more like a bad guy with each thunder strike. I grew up with it. Yourself? I like the rain, sure. But storms, they're a bit annoying. Can't sleep? The man asked, turning his gaze towards the Titan for the first time growing twice as intimidating. Beast Boy did his best to fight that feeling back down and replied. Yeah, for one reason or another, he felt like he couldn't lie with those eyes on him, so he kept his answer short and simple. I see. My sympathies. The man replied, blinking for the first time since they started talking. You have a name? Beast Boy. You? He asked hesitantly, raising his hand out towards him. Nagato. He replied, extending his hand out towards the green one, growing a small friendly smile that did wonders to put Beast Boy at ease. They shook and Beast Boy felt 1,000,000 times better. So, Nagato. Any clue what happened to you? Not in the slightest. He smiled back. I hope I didn't cause you any trouble. Nah, dude. It's just another day for us, Beast Boy said with a shrug of the shoulders. Though, dude, I have to ask, what's up with your eyes? Nagato's smile faded as he raised 2 fingers towards his right eye, caressing the skin around his eyelashes, as if they were battle scars rather than eyes. His smile returned, though weaker than before. It's a long, complicated story. Well, I'm not going anywhere. At least not with this rain anyway, Beast Boy said, gesturing back out towards the storm. Nagato's gaze shifted back to the window. If the weather is bothering you that much, the redhead clasped his hands together, and the intensity returned to his eyes twofold. Release. Beast Boy's entire body tensed up as he felt an invisible energy wave the likes of which he never felt before exploded from Nagato and rushed outwards. Not a moment later, the consistent taps of raindrops began to fade until everything had fallen silent. No freaking way, Beast Boy said in awe. Did you just stop a storm? Nagato settled for a small nod as Beast Boy opened a window to get a better look. The bay was thankfully still illuminated by Jump City, and he could look up and see what was once a vast swath of black clouds disappear or move on, revealing a dark blue sea of sky illuminated by a few patches of stars. Holy shit. Thunder and lightning got nothing on Nagato? Beast Boy turned around just in time to see the redhead start to wobble. He gave another small smile before losing balance completely. Beast Boy caught him just before he could hit the ground. Dude, you okay? I'm a hee-hee. I guess I'm weaker than I thought, Nagato said as blinking several times trying to stave off unconsciousness. It's cool, man, I'll get you back to your room, Beast Boy said, frustrated with himself. This guy was still in no shape to move around, and yet he just let him do whatever he did. Nagato gave a smile of thanks before fainting completely, appearing almost as lifeless as he had been when they first pulled him out of the water. Beast Boy wasted no time, transforming into a green gorilla and moving swiftly out of the hub and back to the infirmary. My respect, Mr. Kobayashi, Bane said, impressed with the results of their card game. It had been a one-sided massacre, but at the same time, it was nice to just sit down and relax every once in a while. You as well, Bane. Give my regards to Batman next time you see him, Sasori replied, bowing in the mercenary direction. Bane accepted the gesture and turned towards Cobblepot. Penguin. Bane tilted his head towards the lounge's owner in a form of goodbye before making his way towards the exit. Croc did the same, grumbling about his lost money, though he took a more discreet exit, disappearing out of through the many hidden exits Penguin had created for his lounge. I'm impressed, Kobayashi. You have a knack for getting along with psychopaths, Cobblepot said, twirling his signature umbrella. The redhead couldn't really correct him on that point, settling for a simple shrug. It comes with the territory, I guess. That it does. That it does, Penguin said, nodding and glancing at the chips that Kobayashi had just gained from a very competitive game. I don't suppose you'd mind paying a simple fee for the chance to play at this table. Not at all, Kobayashi said swiftly. How much would be adequate? Before Penguin could reply, a knock on the door alerted both of them. What? Penguin called out, annoyed. The door opened, revealing a pair of muscular men in fancy tuxedos. Sir, K wants to see you in the basement, one of them said. Does that bartender think he can order me to? Penguin started. He's captured Batman, sir, the other replied. Kobayashi could practically feel Penguin's frustration disappear at those words, as did his interest in any of Kobayashi's money. He himself had to contain a confused eyebrow raise. What? Penguin asked in disbelief. It's true, sir. Me and Gus saw him downstairs. Kay's insisting on a raise. If that sorry excuse for a bartender actually caught Batman, then maybe we'll talk. Go back down there and make sure either of them move. I trust you can find your way out, Kobayashi. Penguin started. Of course, sir, though if I may, could I join you? I've always wanted to see this Batman with my own eyes. Penguin stopped himself and turned back towards the redhead, his eyes once again drifting to the chips. Perhaps we could come to sort of arrangement. The snow had once again started to fall. And the newly minted Robin had to admit, the costume didn't really do much to help keep warm. He'd have to work on that later. Maybe even add a layer of fur under the cloth. You're sure you saw him? Batgirl's voice rang out through Tim's comlink. Yeah, it was him. Cowl, suit and all. Tim replied, perched atop a nearby building that offered a perfect view of the lounge. But he's supposed to be off with the League right now. Batgirl continued. I know. It's got me confused too, Tim replied. It was weird though. I didn't hear a struggle or anything. And if he was that close, why didn't he call for help? Because he's a stubborn bastard, Batgirl yelled back. But call Alfred to double-check. If that isn't actually him, then we have to assume the worst. Which is? That some dumbass thought dressing up like Batman made you Batman, Batgirl said with a sigh. And somehow gave you enough strength to fight a crime syndicate. The basement of the Iceberg Lounge really was more a warehouse than a basement. Several elevators and stairways led up and around to different rooms, each containing boxes of weapons, drugs, and who knew what else. It was guarded by a force of 50 to 75 armed guards who stayed in the room the entire time, as well as 24 others stationed outside any of the possible exits. Penguin only let his best men guard this spot. Cold-hearted killers who didn't scare easy. But even they had to rub their eyes when Batman was brought in by a masked bartender tied up with rope and seemingly unconscious. How'd you get him? One voice called out. I was out on break and saw him hanging around one of the surrounding buildings, Kakuzu replied, growing annoyed with all the looks of attention. Problem? No one just catches Batman like that, another one answered. None of you maybe? Kakuzu replied, tossing the hero up against the wall. Thankfully I'm not like the rest of you. Mr. K, Penguin called out. Kakuzu looked up to see the notorious crime lord practically skipping down the stairs next to a familiar-looking redhead. The two shared a glance, but outside that took no notice of the other. I was told you were working for me strictly as a bartender. I am. Think of this as a little bonus job, Kakuzu replied, kicking Batman for a show of emphasis. Penguin scoffed, reaching the last of the stairs and walking over to him. Why didn't you kill him? I figured you wanted that honor, Kakuzu replied. Penguin's eyes scanned over Batman's body kneeling down and sneering the knight himself. Where's his belt? He asked. With me, Kakuzu replied, crossing his arms. I took it as a portion payment. I'm still waiting on the rest. You'll get your pay, I assure you. If this is actually him, Penguin said, still looking over the unconscious warrior. He looked the same height, same frame of body, but he needed to hear him speak before anything else. You're lucky, K. Bane left not 30 minutes ago. If he knew you were here, Penguin's own chuckle cut him off. Good. Call Pablo Escobar back and we'll settle this right now. Kakuzu shot back with an added edge and a swift crack of the neck. On your own time, K. Not mine, Penguin replied, snapping his fingers. Boys, take him, Brutus. We'll set him up for dinner with the rat. A pair of armed men sprung into action, grabbing Batman and dragging him off towards one of the several doors littering the large room. Penguin turned his back to Kakuzu. You can go back to your work. You'll be called for your payment soon enough. Kakuzu nodded, moving back towards the stairs. I think that'll be it for me as well, sir, Kobayashi said with a light bow. I don't have the stomach for these sorts of things. Of course, Kobayashi, Penguin said, accepting the move without a fuss. Nasty business down here. Get back up and enjoy yourself. And let me know if you ever want another game. Kobayashi nodded and walked up to the same set of stairs as Kakuzu. The pair moved in unison, taking each step quickly and quietly, passing through guard after guard until they reached an elevator. With a slight ding, the door closed in front of them, and they began their ascent back up through building. Neither of them looked at each other, but that didn't stop them from talking. Kobayashi? Kakuzu chuckled. It works just fine. K, Sasori replied. Pablo Escobar? What? Bane's Hispanic made sense. How long have you been here? A few years, Kakuzu admitted with a shrug. I've been keeping busy. It certainly appears so, Sasori sighed. Though you having run-ins with other mercenaries was inevitable if you kept to your profession. But I suppose that doesn't matter now. Not at the moment. Right now, let's find a way to cut the power. That'll give Itachi all he needs, Kakuzu replied as the elevator dinged yet again, stopping at the casino floor. So he'll find us? Sasori asked. I'll have some transportation ready in about 30 minutes. He knows to meet us outside the lounge when it goes down. In the meantime, you want a drink? Sasori raised an eyebrow at his masked friend but nevertheless followed him back to the bar. You seem much more relaxed than you were back home. I don't see why I shouldn't be. Money's constantly flowing in. I get to kill people who annoy me. And best of all, he had a short pause that allowed him a happy breath of relief. A certain religious bastard is nowhere to be seen. Getting a call from Aquaman was always a surprise. Usually more bad than good, but a surprise all the same. Despite being a member of the League, he still mostly kept to himself, rarely showing up at all in the last few years. Perhaps the League's growing transparency with the U.S. government made him feel threatened. Either way, Batman really had no right to judge him. He couldn't exactly call himself a people person. What do you think he wants? Wonder Woman asked, setting the javelin down onto a custom-made Atlantean landing pad. Whatever it is, it can't be good, Batman replied, stepping out of the javelin and onto the Atlantean architecture. Wonder Woman followed suit, accompanied by a small squad of Atlantean guards who escorted them to the palace. It was still a sight to behold if he were still being honest with himself. A brilliant mix of classical architecture and futuristic technology that made the Atlanteans feared and respected both throughout the ancient world and the modern. They found the king himself sitting on his throne, staring down at the newcomers with an ever-present look of annoyance. Took you long enough to get here, the king snapped at the surface dwellers. Sorry, busy day, Wonder Woman replied, not appreciating the tone. She and Arthur never did get along, so that was the nicest reply he was gonna get from her, and he knew it, so he turned his attention to Batman. What is it, Arthur? He asked in his usual grim tone. I'm hoping you can tell me, Aquaman replied, motioning for the to follow, as he walked away from his throne and left the throne room altogether. Their journey didn't take long, and after a flight of stairs and several hallways, they arrived at a large room filled with Atlantean guards and scientists seemingly going over some rather fascinating data, as their perplexed looks were from the papers they held and not towards the other heroes. The trio moved past them quickly and came to a glassed-off area of the room, guarded by a squad of about 10 heavily armored Atlantean guards who stood facing the glass at all times. One of the guards turned to his king and gave a small bow. My lord. Anything new? Aquaman asked. The usual, the guard replied unenthusiastically. The surface dweller seems to have quite the vocabulary. Bruce and Diana moved past them to get a better look at who was the target of discussion. Inside the cell, behind what was probably 2 or 3 layers of Atlantean safety glass, stood a heavily scared man clothed only in a ragged pair of black pants. His hair a joyless shade of gray and sporting 2 strange purple eyes that seemed fixated on the chains that held him to the floor. His mouth was moving constantly, which confused Wonder Woman. Is he talking to someone? See for yourself, Aquaman replied, pressing a button in the side of the wall. Just as the man pulled on his chains in a main attempt to escape. God damn it! Motherfuck! The audio cut back out as his words doubtless continued on. Wonder Woman fought off attempt to smile at the man's immaturity. He isn't exactly charming, is he? Not in the slightest, Aquaman replied, walking up beside her. We found him earlier today inside an Atlantean temple. When my soldiers moved to engage, he fought them off, shattering their bones in a feat of strength that's beyond the average surface dweller. Not quite as strong as, say, you or me, but a fierce warrior nonetheless. Then why doesn't he look more bruised up? Diana asked, noticing that none of the scars the man had on his chest or arms seemed fresh, and he was half the warrior Aquaman seemed to make him out to be. She'd figured there would be fresher marks. He's a quick healer, Aquaman explained. Add to that, he just sort of collapsed in the middle of our fight. My guess is he was more tired from something else rather than fighting. What do you think? She turned to her compatriot, who wasn't there but rather right next to the glass. Batman? The caped crusader seemed to have ignored the conversation entirely, moving towards the glass that separated him from Aquaman's prisoner, glaring out towards him in the way he often did when he locked eyes with some violent punk who didn't know any better. When his eyes met Hayden's, though, he didn't see anything that resembled just a punk. He wasn't scared, angry sure, but not scared. Not in the slightest. Hayden's outburst quieted down when he took notice of Batman's glare and took issue with it. See something you like, jackass? Haydn yelled out towards the dark, didn't respond, surprising no one but sending Haydn into another annoyed frenzy. You're just asking for it. I'm not good enough for you to talk to or something? Batman remained his typical stoic self, taking note of the man's rather animalistic movements. Not that they resembled any animal in particular, but in how erratic they were. His paces, his pulling on the chains, his blinking even. There was just something off about all of it, and it gave him the impression that this man wasn't quite human. Oh, the silent treatment. Newsflash, jackass, all that does is piss me off more. Haydn yelled out, spitting across his prison cell, splashing right on the glass where Batman's face was. Once again not getting a rise out of him, Haydn's eyes peeked over to the woman who accompanied him. He quickly laughed at the sight of her garb. I think that one's for you, Aquaman said over to Diana. A slight twitch of her eye displayed her annoyance. Can he hear us? Now he can, Aquaman replied, pressing another button. Wonder Woman moved towards the glass. Who are you? She asked. Haydn, surprised by the voices, replied immediately. Who the fuck are you? He asked right back. Did the blonde bastard decide to give me some company or something? Diana's eyes narrowed in annoyance, but she continued. No. We're trying to help you. Just tell us who you are and we can. Who the fuck am I? He yelled out, pulling his chains once again. Bitch, I'm Haydn. Now let me out of here. Diana sighed and clenched her fist. Did the man not realize who they were or where he was? Or was he just an asshole? A gut feeling told her both. You attacked Atlantis. Nearly killed my men. Aquaman called out to the Jashinist. You're not going anywhere. Oh, the blonde bastard speaks at last. Haydn turning his gaze towards the king. Well, listen to me, Harpoon Hand, you can take your shitty guards and shove them up your ass. It's gonna feel like candy compared to what I'm gonna do to you when I get out of here. Aquaman's only reply was a sigh before a twisted smile stretched across the prisoner's face. Or maybe I could have a nice chat with the redhead you were with. That got a reaction. Arthur's eyes narrowed and a rather dark scowl took over his face. I've heard enough, he growled out. Open it. Diana placed a hand on his shoulder to try and calm him. No one threatens my family, Diana, Aquaman replied, brushing it away. No one. The glass slid open and Haydn let out a laugh as Arthur marched in. Come on. Let's just see you try that agaga. A particularly strong punch smashed into Haydn's mouth, knocking him to the ground and putting him out like a light. Learn to shut him up. Aquaman staring down at the now prone Haydn. Brilliant. Except now he can't talk to us, Batman told him coldly as Aquaman moved back towards them. Look, you got a good enough impression of him, Aquaman defended. So he ring any bells or not? I can put his name in the database and see what pops up. But I don't recognize him, Diana said, crossing her arms. And more importantly, he didn't recognize us, Batman replied. What are you getting at? She asked. Despite his hostile nature, his body language suggested he was confused. We may be dealing with an accidental teleportation. Accidentally teleporting into Atlantis? That doesn't sound like a bit of a stretch to you, Wonder Woman asked, raising an eyebrow. What is anymore? Batman asked right back to the Amazon. She had to give him that. The point is, I don't think he was sent here to kill Arthur or anyone else. Batman? The familiar voice of the Wayne butler rang through his cowl. What is it? Bruce asked back. As Alfred explained the situation, Wonder Woman noticed a few drops of crimson dripping down from Aquaman's only hand. Hit him too hard? She asked over to him. He looked down towards the cut and brushed it off. Must have just caught it on a tooth of his. Batgirl and Robin seem to be under the impression that you've been taken hostage by one of Penguin's goons. What? Batman asked right back. As Jacob sat quietly in the bathroom handcuffed to a pipe of a newly refurbished sink, H began to wonder where exactly he was on the grief ladder right now. He couldn't exactly be angry. Penguin hadn't exactly kept his hatred for rats a secret. Panic? No, that came and went when they first found him out. Acceptance? Well, he still didn't want to die, let alone get eaten by a shark, so that was a no. Bargaining might work. He had talked himself out of bad situations before, so there was still hope on some end that he could come to some sort of arrangement with one of his captors. One of which was a medium-sized man who he had never gotten along with, and the other a big bastard who knew to keep his mouth shut and follow orders. Maybe he could do it. Hey, he started. Shut it, rat. The smaller replied with annoyed edge. You know, my dad was a stockbroker. Jacob continued. Jesus, Jacob. Can't you just spend your last minutes in respectful silence? This point you're just begging for him to hit you, the big guard said. I'm about to be fed to a shark, Jacob yelled back. God forbid, I try to weasel some way out of it. Then you shouldn't have been a rat, the other guard replied, turning around to stare at him. Or at the very least, told Cobblepot who you're working for. It might have been a bit quicker. Thanks, Jerry, I could always count on you to be a Wayne Tower-sized prick. Before Jerry could do anything to respond to the insult, a door opened up revealing another gun-toting henchman. Jerry, you gotta see this. What? Cobblepot's caught the Batman. Jerry's eyes widened to dinner plates and a smile the likes of which Jacob had never seen appeared. You're serious? Hell yeah, the new guy replied, practically beaming. He's taking him to Brutus right now. Let's go see who he is before he's fish food. Jerry bolted out of that room faster than Jacob had ever seen, pushing past the new guy who quickly followed suit, leaving the door wide open and leaving Jacob alone with just one guard. You not going, Wallace? Jacob asked to his big former associate, hoping he would follow Jerry out of the room. Wallace sighed. Jacob, you know Cobblepot will have my ass if I leave you here. Yeah, but we played poker together. Surely you'd be fine with. Jacob stopped when he saw Wallace slowly shake his head. Come on, man. I'm not risking my life and paycheck for you. If I actually thought you had some cash on you, we could talk, but like you said, we played poker together. Jacob's hope faded with those words and he drooped his head. He had to get stuck with one of the few not-so-asshole-ish people in Penguin's gang. Figures. Was that acceptance now? Was he finally on that one? He pulled the cuffs against the pipe, trying desperately to somehow will himself super strength. No, he'd stick with bargaining right up until it killed him. Gather round, boys. Gather round. Penguin called out to his encoeming soldiers. 20 to 30 now came into the big empty room, each one looking like Christmas had come early. We've got ourselves a Batman. Batman himself now sat up against the outer wall of a large pool of salt water, his hands cuffed behind him and still sporting his signature cape and cowl. His eyes were shut and his heart rate low, telling everyone there that the beating he must have gotten from Kay had been a brutal one. Whispers of disbelief rumbled through the crowd. That couldn't actually be him, could it? The mythical Batum, caught and unconscious, just waiting to be killed. I know that a few of you are surprised. And hell, I'll level with you, so am I. Penguin called out to a wave of minor laughs. Batman himself, sitting here like a damned daisy just waiting to be plucked. I won't be pissed if you want to rub your eyes. He pointed to the unconscious knight. But hear me now, boys. It's true. And I think we're all owed a little vengeance against the freak. A chorus of loud yes and approving yells rang out from the group, giving Penguin all he needed to walk towards Batman without any hesitation in his step. And I'm sure you all know Brutus here has quite the appetite when it comes to freaks. Penguin laughed, clapping his hand on the pool's outer wall. He sneered towards the 15-foot tiger shark inside, who swam inside, eyeing the prey that sat outside. With another snarl of pleasure, he bent down to a knee. But first, let's just see who the bastard was that caused us so much trouble. His hand stretched out towards the legendary cowl that held the identity of his enemy for so many years. He could feel sweat drip down the side of his head, eagerly waiting to see the bastard's face. It was almost too good to be true. Which naturally meant that it wasn't. The second his hand touched the cowl, the white slits that covered Batman's eyes vanished, revealing a pair of blood-red orbs that peered right into Cobblepot's soul. Not a second later, Batman exploded in a fantastic showing of white smoke filling the room. Within moments, the sounds of Cobblepot's agonized screams filled the room and his thugs began to draw their guns. Then the lights went out. Since the 1980s? Sasori asked towards his masked associate. He placed his newly empty shot glass on a nearby table. Kakaza's hand pulled back from the assortment of switches in a box labeled power. Yeah, pretty much. 1985, I think. He sighed. Sasori curled a finger under his chin. And you never looked for any of us? I did at first. Just sort of gave up after a while. Kakazu explained. Not exactly profitable to waste money on finding people you're not sure ended up in the same place. Sasori tilted his head in understanding. Kakaza had always prioritized money over anything else. The bounty hunter sighed yet again, looking around the room Sasori himself had been in just a few moments ago. I never understood why you'd put the power box in your private room. I look in a broom closet somewhere, and have people watching it 24/7. Sasori raised an eyebrow. Strange you never opened an enterprise yourself. I haven't been here as long as you, but I know there's plenty of money to be made in a variety of things. Kakazu rubbed the back of his neck with a shrug. I tried a few times here and there, but things never seemed to work out. A door creaked open a few feet away from them and Sasori's eyes narrowed. Maldito Penguino grumbled, a large, familiar-looking man whom he had just played cards with. Bane's eyes immediately locked on to the two other occupants in the room, especially the one he hadn't seen previous. Kakazu's eyes didn't narrow like Sasori's, but they did harden like they had countless times before he'd engaged in a fight. Bane, long time no see. How's the arm? Oh, still laughing about that, are you? Bane growled out. His calm demeanor from earlier now completely gone. I've got something you can laugh about. Bane's hands drifted towards his neck. Bane, perhaps we can come to an understanding, Sasori said, putting up his hand to try and calm the mercenary. Shut your mouth, Kobayashi, Bane yelled, touching something on the back of his neck. This is personal. Bane's already enormous frame began to increase, his muscles and veins growing so much against his skin Sasori thought for a moment it might peel off. But it didn't, and they kept growing and growing until he stood at 3 times the frame he had been, now dwarfing the pair of them by a considerable amount. You're gonna pay for Juarez, Bane groaned, his bloodshot eyes not fully focused on Kakazu. Juarez? Kakazu asked back, smiling under his mask and cracking his knuckles. What about Istanbul or Hong Kong? Bane's roar of rage followed, and he charged towards his prey only to find his prey not backing down in the slightest. Sasori for his part wisely leaped out of the way before the pair clashed, and made a beeline for the door. He slammed it behind him just in time to block the poker table from flying into him. Sasori sighed as the sounds from behind the door only increased. He needed to get out of here. Transportation in 30 minutes? Couldn't have said what car it was or anything useful, could? He thought as he made his way back out towards the casino floor. With any luck, that brawl would be over quickly and Kakazu could come out and join him as they wait for Itachi. Everything could still go off without a hitch. Then the lights went out through the entire lounge. Yeah, it wasn't him, Tim explained over to Barbara. He's in Atlantis right now. Great, which means some jackass dressed as Batman just got her words stopped in her throat as every neon sign and light that covered the lounge faded to darkness and murmurs of confusion from the crowd below made their way to her ears. Well, that can't be good, Tim said, walking up next to her. The pair shared a nod and leapt off the side, intent on figuring out what's going on. Unfortunately, their investigation was cut short when 2 men came crashing through the lounge building and onto the street beside them, narrowly missing a few parked cars. Batgirl's eyes widened when she recognized one of them as the man who had broken Batman's back years ago. She pulled him away from that man and a little closer to the other who had crashed just beside a small Cadillac. She was almost certain he was dead until he heard a groan of mild annoyance. The man picked himself back up and stared at the pair that he now towered over. Watch it, kids, Kakazu warned before facing his foe, who also stood up a few feet away. Bane roared and picked up a large limousine over his head, launching towards them. Kakazu charged and leapt to meet it in the air, smashing into the limo with his full body and causing it to explode in a spectacular showing of orange and red. What's with that guy? Robin asked. No idea, Batgirl admitted. Perhaps it was some new hero she just hadn't heard of yet, but something about the man told her otherwise. He could be from the League. No, I mean he's the guy who took in the Batman look-alike, Robin yelled back. Batgirl looked back to the fight with renewed confusion. Why was Bane fighting him then? Was it a pride thing? A contract? Either way, the news seemed to be a match for Bane, so that freed them up to get back inside and search for the Batman look-alike. One look at all the escaping patrons of the lounge through the main entrance told them they'd be better off going through the hole Bane had made. Itachi almost pitied the poor fools. He didn't know who this Batman was, but they must have instilled a great amount of fear into their souls. Almost one of them screamed at the top of their lungs once the lights went out and muttered about Batman's history of breaking their bones and spirits. That's where the almost came in. They really should have found different professions if Batman consistently achieves victory. Find him. Find the bastard. One particular voice rang out. He broke my freaking hand. Why was it crime bosses always cried the loudest when hurt? Doesn't really set a good example. But maybe that's just him. One particular bullet whizzed by, echoing through the rafters on impact and bringing Itachi back to reality. Right, time to take them out. With his Sharingan piercing through the darkness, he grabbed a handful each of shuriken and kunai just as a few of the smarter men below finally pulled out some flashlights. Just as the first powered on, its owner fell to the ground crying in pain. A kunai knife embedded in his chest right above his heart. The action set off a hail of bullets up towards the rafters, and Itachi took it as time to test his agility. Dancing through the gunfire as if he were the Dark Knight himself, Itachi leapt from rafter to rafter, throwing down a kunai or shuriken every chance he got, and each one finding its mark in his enemy's chest. One by one each man fell to the ground crying in pain before falling silent save for breathing. "You're gonna want to be careful with those, by the way." He thought back to an exchange of words he had with Sasori. "I had them specially coated in a paralyzing agent. Slightest cut, and you're done for at least 24 hours. Though I'm sure that doesn't matter to you." It was a welcomed add-on. He could afford to be less lethal and just as effective. 3 more shuriken glided through the air and found their targets. That made 20 by now. He was making good time, but he couldn't see Jacob anywhere. A part of him wondered if they were too late, so he looked back to the shark pool and saw Brutus still swimming around, very eager for something meaty to fall into his hunting grounds. The thing about sharks is, you can always tell when they've eaten by how skittish they are. The more excited, the more hungry. Always remember that if you go swimming. He'd really have to thank Kisame for that little speck of knowledge if he ever saw him again. With a nod of farewell to the still hungry Brutus, he leapt down to the ground and swiftly began to cut his way through the rest of the thugs in his way. Once the lights had gone out, Wallace had immediately pulled out a flashlight and put it against Jacob's face as if he were Batman. "Jesus, Wallace, I'm still here," Jacob yelled out, annoyed. Wallace, after a sigh, pulled away and put the light up against the door. "Sorry, can't too careful." He pointed his shotgun up towards the door, dropping the flashlight just as the sounds of gunfire and running footsteps could be heard just a few feet beyond it. A few more seconds of that chaos, and then silence save for a single pair of footsteps that stopped just outside the door. It creaked open, at first worrying both Jacob and Wallace as to who it was before Wallace glimpsed a familiar pair of red eyes. "Itachi?" Wallace asked. Itachi blinked in surprise at the sight of the man he had met yesterday. "Wallace, good to see you," he said, giving the man a small smile that seemed far more creepy than it was meant to with the light on the ground still illuminating it. He slipped a pair of sharp blades back into a pack strapped to his leg. "What the hell's going on?" Wallace asked, lowering his gun slightly. "What are you doing here?" "Rescuing him." Itachi pointed to Jacob. Wallace turned to his captive, who just shook his head, signaling he didn't know what was going on. "Paul and Frank went looking for you after you vanished. Glad to see you're okay," Wallace said with a laugh. "You too. Now let's go," Itachi said, walking past him and towards the chained-up Jacob. "Come on, dude, exactly how are you going to get these things off?" Jacob's voice slowed to a stop with a quick slash from Itachi's kunai went right through the cuffs. Jacob's eyes blazed back and forth from the cuffs to Itachi. "Who are you again?" "Your ticket out of here. Wallace, let's get to the roof," Itachi ordered. Wallace had himself a laugh. "Itachi, come on, I can't just let you leave with this rat, right?" Itachi raised an eyebrow at the idea of some actual loyalty to Cobblepot and decided to test it. "I know a man who will pay thrice what Penguin is." His test proved him right. "Let's go," Wallace replied, moving past the two. "Cobblepot's got an elevator for private guests of his just down the hall." So just to be clear,